The telegram crumpled in Clara Whitmore's trembling hand as Montana's bitter wind whipped through the empty train platform. 6 hours. She'd been waiting 6 hours for a man who would never come. Her leg throbbed beneath her traveling dress, the limp that had marked her as damaged goods in Boston now condemning her to abandonment 2,000 miles from home. But as Clara lifted her chin against the gathering dusk, she didn't know that behind the grimy windows of the Silver Star dance hall, a man named Gideon Hale was about to change everything. Welcome to our story, friends. Follow Clara's journey from that desolate platform to finding her true destiny. Comment below where you're watching from. I love seeing how far these frontier tales travel. The locomotive's whistle had long since faded into Montana's vast emptiness when Clara Whitmore finally accepted the truth. She pressed her gloved fingers against the rough wooden bench, counting the splinters that caught on the worn fabric as if they might somehow add up to a different reality. The September sun, which had blazed overhead when she'd first stepped onto Clearwater's platform, with hope singing in her chest, now bled orange across the horizon. "Ma'am," a young boy, perhaps 12, approached with cautious steps. His boots kicked up small clouds of dust that settled on Clara's dark blue traveling dress. "Station's closing soon. My pa says you need to move along." Clara's throat tightened. Move along? To where? With what? She had exactly $14.37 to her name, the remnants of her life savings after purchasing the train ticket that had carried her from Boston's cobblestone streets to this frontier purgatory. "I'm waiting for someone," she managed, though the words tasted like ash. The boy's gaze dropped to her left foot, twisted slightly inward despite her best efforts to hide it beneath her skirts. She'd seen that look 1,000 times before. Pity mixed with revulsion, curiosity tempered by the human instinct to look away from imperfection. "Been waiting awful long, ma'am. Seen you here when I came to help Pa this morning." 6 hours and 43 minutes, to be precise. Clara had counted every one. "Perhaps there's been a delay," she said, hating how her voice cracked on the last word. "Mr. Harrington, Nathaniel Harrington. He owns a ranch outside town. Surely someone knows where I might find him." The boy's face went pale beneath his prairie tan. He took a step backward, nearly tripping over his own feet. "Nathaniel Harrington?" His voice pitched high with something Clara couldn't quite identify. Fear? Surprise? "Ma'am, I gotta get my pa." He ran before Clara could respond, leaving her alone again with her trunk and her dwindling hope. The platform stretched empty in both directions, the single track disappearing into the golden grassland like a river of iron. Somewhere out there, Nathaniel Harrington had a ranch with her name on the deed, or would have once they married. His letters had painted pictures of wide skies and honest work, of a place where her quick mind would matter more than her uneven gait. "I am not a man given to pretty words," he'd written in his first response to her advertisement, "but I know the value of a good woman. Your education and refinement would be appreciated here, Miss Whitmore. The frontier has little use for perfect dancers, but great need for sharp minds and steady hearts." Steady heart. Clara pressed her palm against her chest, feeling the wild bird of her pulse beating against her ribs. Her heart felt anything but steady now. The sound of boots on wood made her look up. The boy had returned with a man who could only be his father, same wheat-colored hair, same suspicious squint. But there was someone else with them, a tall figure who moved with the easy confidence of a man who owned every room he entered, even when that room was nothing but sky and platform. "Miss Whitmore?" The tall man removed his hat, revealing dark hair streaked with premature silver at the temples. His eyes were the color of whiskey and firelight, and they studied her with an intensity that made Clara's breath catch. "Miss Clara Whitmore from Boston?" "Yes." She struggled to her feet, hating how her bad leg buckled slightly, forcing her to grip the bench for support. Did Mr. Harrington send you?" The man's jaw tightened. He exchanged a look with the station master that told Clara everything and nothing all at once. "I'm Gideon Hale," he said finally. "I own the Silver Star dance hall in town. As for Nathaniel—" He paused, seeming to weigh his words. "Ma'am, when's the last time you heard from him?" 3 weeks ago." Clara pulled the final letter from her reticule, the paper soft from repeated handling. "He said to take the Northern Pacific to Clearwater, that he'd meet me at the station. September 15th, today. Gideon Hale took the letter, scanning it quickly. His expression darkened with each line. Son of a... He caught himself, glancing at the boy. Pardon me, ma'am, but this is Nathaniel's writing, sure enough. Did he not tell you? Tell me what? But Clara already knew. The way the boy had recoiled at Nathaniel's name, the way these men looked at her with that particular combination of pity and awkwardness that always accompanied bad news. She knew. Nathaniel Harrington died 2 weeks ago, Gideon said quietly. Barn fire. He was trying to save his horses. The platform seemed to tilt beneath Clara's feet. She sat down hard on the bench, her vision blurring at the edges. Dead. The word echoed in her mind like a stone dropped into a deep well. Dead. Her future, her escape, her chance at being more than poor Clara with the twisted foot. Dead. I'm sorry, ma'am, the station master said, shifting uncomfortably. But like I told your boy here, station's closing. You'll need to find lodging in town. Lodging? Clara laughed, the sound sharp and brittle as a winter ice. Of course. Lodging. $14.37. How long would that last in a frontier town? A week? 2 if she was careful? There's a respectable boarding house on Main Street, Gideon offered. Mrs. Haversham's. She's fair with her prices. Clara forced herself to meet his eyes. And how much would fare be, Mr. Hale? $1 a day, including meals. 2 weeks then. 2 weeks to figure out how a woman with a limp and a teaching certificate was supposed to survive in a Montana cattle town. 2 weeks before she became another cautionary tale, the foolish Eastern woman who'd believed a stranger's letters and paid the price. I'll manage, she said, though she had no idea how. Gideon studied her for a long moment. There was something in his expression she couldn't quite read. Calculation, perhaps, or curiosity. He was handsome in a rough-hewn way, with the kind of face that had seen both violence and kindness and had made peace with both. You came all this way to marry Nathaniel, he said. It wasn't a question. I came for a new life, Clara corrected. Marriage was simply the means to that end. You always this honest? I've found that lies require too much energy to maintain, Mr. Hale. I prefer to save my strength for more important battles. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Nathaniel would have liked you. But we'll never know for certain, will we? The station master cleared his throat. If you folks could continue this conversation elsewhere... Gideon bent to pick up Clara's trunk, lifting it as easily as if it contained feathers instead of everything she owned in the world. Come on, Miss Whitmore. I'll take you to Mrs. Haversham's. I can manage on my own. Of course you can, but the trunk's heavy and Main Street's a half-mile from here, unless you're planning to drag it through the dust. Pride warred with practicality. Practicality won. Clara had learned long ago that pride was a luxury she couldn't afford. Thank you, she said stiffly. The walk to town was slower than it might have been, Gideon adjusting his pace to match Clara's uneven gait without making it obvious. The road was rutted from wagon wheels and recent rain, and more than once Clara had to concentrate to keep from stumbling. But Gideon didn't offer his arm, didn't hover or fuss. He simply walked beside her, carrying her trunk and pointing out landmarks. That's the general store. Henderson's. Good people, fair prices. The church is at the end of Main Street. Methodist. Reverend Davies is young but means well, and that, he gestured to a 2-story building with music spilling from its windows, is the Silver Star. Clara caught a glimpse of bright lights and swirling skirts through the bat-wing doors. A woman's laugh rang out, high and tinkling as champagne bubbles. A dance hall, she said flatly. Among other things. It's also the only place in town with a decent piano, if that matters to you. Why would it? He shrugged. Educated woman like you, figured you might play. I do, actually. The admission surprised her. Though I hardly see how that's relevant now. Everything's relevant in a town this size, Miss Whitmore. Every skill, every talent, every secret, they all come to matter eventually. They reached Mrs. Haversham's boarding house, a narrow building squeezed between a barber shop and a laundry. The proprietress was a thin woman with steel gray hair and eyes like a hawk's, sharp and unforgiving. No visitors after 8, no liquor, no smoking, no men above the first floor, she rattled off before Clara had even set foot inside. $1 a day, paid in advance, breakfast at 6, dinner at 5. You miss it, you go hungry. Clara counted out $7, trying not to let her hands shake. Half her money gone, just like that. What about work? She asked as Mrs. Havisham pocketed the bills. Are there any positions available in town? I'm educated, I can read and write. I have experience with— The school's got a teacher, Mrs. Havisham interrupted. Has had for 2 years now. As for other work— Her gaze dropped to Clara's foot, and her mouth pursed. Well, you might try the general store. Henderson sometimes needs help with inventory. Gideon set Clara's trunk at the foot of the narrow stairs. Actually, I might have something. Both women turned to stare at him. At the Silver Star? Mrs. Havisham's voice could have frozen water in July. Mr. Hale, I'll not have those kind of women in my establishment. I need a bookkeeper, he said mildly. Someone who can read, write, and handle numbers. The job doesn't require dancing, Mrs. Havisham, just arithmetic. Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks. I'm not desperate enough to work in a den of iniquity, Mr. Hale. Den of iniquity? He seemed amused. That's a new one. Usually it's house of ill repute or devil's playground. But suit yourself, Miss Whitmore. The offer stands if you change your mind. He tipped his hat and left, whistling something jaunty that Clara didn't recognize. That man, Mrs. Havisham muttered, shaking her head. Trouble through and through. You do well to keep your distance, Miss Whitmore. Clara climbed the stairs to her room, each step an effort. The space was barely large enough for the narrow bed and washstand, with a single window that looked out onto an alley. She sat on the thin mattress and finally allowed herself to cry, silent tears that rolled down her cheeks and dropped onto her clasped hands. She'd been so certain this would work. The advertisement in the matrimonial news had seemed like divine providence. A rancher seeking an educated wife, specifically noting that physical beauty was less important than character and intelligence. She'd written with complete honesty about her circumstances, including her disability. Nathaniel's response had been everything she'd hoped for. And now he was dead, and she was alone in a town that had no use for a limping schoolteacher. Clara unpacked slowly, hanging her 3 dresses in the narrow wardrobe, placing her books on the windowsill. She had Shakespeare, Dickens, and a volume of Wordsworth that had been her mother's. At the bottom of the trunk, wrapped in tissue paper, was her one luxury, a silver hand mirror that had belonged to her grandmother. She held it up, studying her reflection in the fading light. 28 years old, with brown hair that never quite held a curl, and eyes that couldn't decide if they were green or gray. Not pretty, but not plain either. Just unremarkable. Add the limp, and she became less than unremarkable. She became invisible, or worse, an object of pity. A knock at the door interrupted her self-examination. "Dinner's served," Mrs. Havisham called. The dining room was cramped, with a single long table where 6 other boarders were already seated. They looked up when Clara entered, their expressions ranging from curiosity to indifference. She took the only empty chair, at the far end next to a man who smelled strongly of sheep. "You're the one came to marry Nathaniel Harrington," the man said without preamble. "Shame about that. Good man, Nathaniel. Stupid way to die, though." "All ways of dying are stupid," Clara replied, reaching for the platter of boiled beef. The man laughed, revealing several missing teeth. "Fair point. I'm Tom Brennan. I work the Lazy K Ranch out east. Clara Whitmore. From back east, they say. Boston. Long way to come for disappointment." Clara set down her fork. "Is there anything in this town that isn't immediately gossiped about?" "Nope." Tom seemed cheerful about it. "Too small, too boring. New face like yours, especially with a story attached. That's entertainment for weeks." The woman across from Clara, middle-aged with nervous hands that never stopped moving, leaned forward. "Is it true you're afflicted?" "If you mean do I have a limp, yes." "Born that way?" "Childhood illness." "My cousin had a girl like that. Never did marry. Ended up taking in washing until her hands gave out. Dead at 42. Clara pushed back from the table, her appetite gone. "If you'll excuse me." She climbed back to her room, ignoring Mrs. Haversham's sharp reminder about no food outside the dining hours. The sun had set completely now, and the town was coming alive in a different way. Music drifted from the Silver Star, along with laughter and the occasional whoop of excitement. Clara stood at her window, watching the alley below. A cat stalked something in the shadows. A drunk stumbled past, singing off-key. Normal frontier town life, she supposed, the kind of life Nathaniel's letters had prepared her for. She pulled out his correspondence, reading through them again by candlelight. He'd been 41, a widower with no children. His first wife had died of fever 5 years ago, and he'd finally decided he needed companionship more than solitude. "I am not romantic," he'd written. "I work hard, I speak plain, and I go to bed tired. But I would treat you well, Miss Whitmore. You would have your own house, your own garden if you wanted it, and respect in the community. That's all I can offer, but I offer it honestly." Honest. Everyone was so concerned with honesty out here, as if it were currency more valuable than gold. But what good was honesty when it left you stranded and penniless? A commotion in the alley drew her attention. 2 men were arguing, their voices raised but words indistinct. One of them was definitely drunk. The other, Clara recognized Gideon Hale's tall figure even in the darkness. He was supporting the drunk man, trying to guide him away from the boarding house. "Not here, Frank," she heard him say. "You know Mrs. Haversham doesn't allow—" "She's here, ain't she?" the drunk man slurred. "The limping bride?" "Heard she was staying here." "Go home, Frank." "Wanted to see her. See what kind of woman would come all this way for old Nathaniel. Must be desperate or crazy." "Or both," Gideon said quietly. "Now come on, before—" The boarding house door slammed open. Mrs. Haversham stood silhouetted in the lamplight, a shotgun in her hands. "Off my property, both of you." "We're going," Gideon assured her, hauling Frank backward. "And you." Mrs. Haversham looked up at Clara's window. "No encouraging visitors, Miss Whitmore, or you'll find yourself on the street." Clara stepped back, heat flooding her face. She hadn't been encouraging anyone. She'd simply been existing, and apparently that was enough to cause trouble. She lay down fully clothed, staring at the water stains on the ceiling. 7 days. That's what she'd paid for. 7 days to find work or face the choice between starvation and shame. The music from the Silver Star played on, a tinny piano, an occasional fiddle creating melodies that spoke of whiskey and women and forgotten dreams. Clara closed her eyes, but sleep wouldn't come. Instead, she found herself thinking about Gideon Hale and his unexpected job offer, a bookkeeper at a dance hall. It was absurd, scandalous, the kind of thing that would have ruined her completely in Boston. But she wasn't in Boston anymore. The next morning came too soon and not soon enough. Clara had barely slept, her mind churning through possibilities and problems. She dressed carefully in her most conservative dress, a brown wool that did nothing for her complexion but suggested respectability. Breakfast was porridge, gray and lumpy. Clara forced it down, knowing she couldn't afford to skip meals. Tom Brennan was already gone, but the nervous woman, Mrs. Dalton, Clara had learned, watched her with avid curiosity. "You going to look for work today?" "Yes." "Henderson's store is—" "I know where it is. Thank you." Clara left before the interrogation could continue. The morning was crisp with a bite that warned of winter's approach. Main Street was busier than she'd expected, with wagons rolling past and people conducting their daily business. Several stopped to stare at her, and she heard whispers following in her wake. "That's her. All the way from Boston. Poor thing, with that foot." Henderson's general store was exactly what she'd expected, cramped, dusty, and smelling of pickles and leather. Mr. Henderson was a round man with kind eyes and a regretful expression. "I'm sorry, Miss Whitmore, but I've got all the help I need. My boys work the stock, and my wife handles the counter when I'm not here." The milliner's shop was the same story, as was the hotel, the bakery, and even the undertaker's establishment. "Not much call for an assistant," the undertaker said, not unkindly. "Most folks die simple around here." By noon, Clara had exhausted every respectable establishment in Clearwater. Her leg ached from the walking, and her pride had taken more hits than she could count. She stood in the middle of Main Street, wondering if she had enough money for a return ticket to Boston. Not that she had anything to return to. She'd sold everything to finance this journey, burned every bridge in pursuit of a new life. Rough morning. Clara turned to find Gideon Hale leaning against a post, his expression unreadable. "I've had better." "Henderson turn you down?" "Everyone turned me down." "Everyone respectable, you mean?" Clara's jaw tightened. "Yes. My offer still stands." "I told you." "You told me you weren't desperate enough." "Well, Miss Whitmore, how desperate are you now?" She wanted to slap him. She wanted to walk away with her dignity intact. She wanted to be anyone else, anywhere else, with choices that didn't feel like choosing between different kinds of doom. What exactly would this bookkeeping job entail? She heard herself ask. Managing accounts, tracking inventory, keeping the girls' earnings straight, making sure no one's skimming from the till. The girls. Dancers. Servers all employed legitimate, before you ask. The Silver Star's a business, Miss Whitmore, not a brothel. The distinction seems minimal. The distinction keeps me on the right side of the law and them on the right side of Fed. He straightened, pulling a watch from his vest. Come by at 2 if you're interested. I'll show you the books, let you see what you'd be dealing with. No obligation. Why? Clara asked. Why offer this to me? Gideon was quiet for a moment, his whiskey eyes thoughtful. Nathaniel was my friend. One of the few I had in this town. He talked about you, you know. Read your letters out loud sometimes when he'd had a few drinks. He was excited, happier than I'd seen him since Martha died. Martha? His first wife. Good woman. They built that ranch together from nothing. He paused. I suppose I feel like I owe him something. And you came all this way on faith and a promise. That takes courage, or stupidity. Sometimes they're the same thing. Clara watched a tumbleweed roll past, driven by wind she couldn't feel. If I came to look at the books, just to look, would the entire town know about it within the hour? Probably within half an hour. We're efficient with our gossip here. Despite everything, Clara felt her lips twitch toward a smile. You're not exactly selling this opportunity, Mr. Hale. I'm being honest. You strike me as someone who appreciates that. I'm beginning to think this town has an obsession with honesty. It's all we've got out here, Miss Whitmore. That and survival. Sometimes, if we're lucky, they go hand in hand. He touched his hat brim and walked away, leaving Clara standing in the dusty street with a decision to make. She could feel eyes on her from various windows, the town watching to see what the abandoned mail-order bride would do next. She thought about her $14, now $7. She thought about Mrs. Haversham's boarding house and its thin walls and thinner charity. She thought about the teaching certificate in her trunk that was worthless in a town that already had a teacher. And she thought about Nathaniel Harrington, dead in a barn fire, trying to save horses that were probably as doomed as he was. At 5 minutes to 2, Clara stood outside the Silver Star. The batwing doors were less intimidating in daylight, and the music was absent. She could hear voices inside, low and businesslike. Before she could lose her nerve, she pushed through the doors. The interior was larger than she'd expected, with a long bar along one wall and tables scattered throughout. A stage dominated the far end, with red curtains that had seen better days. The floor was scarred wood, marked by boots and spurs and God knew what else. The air smelled of stale tobacco and something floral, perfume probably, attempting to mask less pleasant odors. Miss Whitmore. Gideon emerged from a door behind the bar. In the daylight filtering through grimy windows, she could see him more clearly. He was perhaps 35, with lines around his eyes that suggested he laughed often, though she hadn't seen much evidence of it. His clothes were well made but practical, not a dandy, but a man who understood the value of appearance. Mr. Hale. The office is upstairs. Clara followed him, intensely aware of her uneven footsteps on the stairs. The office was a surprise. Neat, organized, with a large desk and several filing cabinets. Ledgers were stacked on shelves, and a calculator sat prominently on the desk's corner. This was Nathaniel's suggestion, Gideon said, noticing her surprise. He helped me set up the system 2 years ago.
Said I was losing money hand over fist without proper books. Was he right? Usually it was about practical things. Gideon pulled out a ledger, opening it to the current month. This is what you'd be dealing with. Clara studied the entries.
The handwriting was atrocious, but the math was worse. Columns didn't add up, entries were inconsistent, and there were erasures everywhere. "This is a disaster," she said without thinking, then caught herself. "I apologize, I didn't mean—" "It's a disaster," Gideon agreed. "I've been trying to keep it myself since Nathaniel died, but numbers aren't my strength." "What is your strength?" He grinned, the expression transforming his face. "Keeping the peace, pouring drinks, and occasionally throwing out cowboys who forget their manners." Clara ran her finger down a column of figures, automatically correcting the math in her head. "You're losing at least $50 a month to arithmetic errors alone. How can you tell that so quickly?" Pattern recognition. These inventory costs don't match your sales. Either someone's stealing or you can't add. She looked up. "I'm guessing it's the latter, though the former is also possible." "Both, probably." He leaned against the desk, studying her. "The job's yours if you want it. $20 a week, plus a room upstairs if you need it." "A room? Here? In a dance hall?" "It's got its own entrance, off the back stairs. Lock on the door, no one would bother you. $20 a week. That was more than she'd made teaching in Boston. It was enough to live on, enough to save, enough to maybe buy a ticket somewhere else if she needed to." "What's the catch?" "No catch. You keep the books, manage the inventory, make sure the girls get paid fair. Hours are flexible. You don't need to be here during the evening entertainment unless you want to be." "And if I don't want to be?" "Then you don't. Though you might find it's not what you expect." Clara looked around the office again. It was just numbers, really. Numbers didn't care about propriety or reputation. Numbers were clean, logical, safe. "When would I start?" "Tomorrow, if you're willing. Tonight, if you're eager. And the whole town will know by sunset that I've taken a position here. Probably by 4 o'clock, honestly." Clara thought about Mrs. Haversham's pursed lips, about Mrs. Dalton's nervous gossip, about all the proper establishments that had turned her away. She thought about her dwindling funds and her non-existent options. "I'll take it," she said. Gideon extended his hand. After a moment's hesitation, Clara shook it. His palm was calloused, but his grip gentle, as if he was aware of his strength and careful not to overwhelm. "Welcome to the Silver Star, Miss Whitmore." "Clara," she said, "if I'm going to be ruined, we might as well use first names." "You're not ruined, you're employed. There's a difference. Tell that to the good women of Clearwater. The good women of Clearwater can mind their own business." "They usually do, right after they finish minding everyone else's. Despite everything, the exhaustion, the fear, the overwhelming sense of having stepped off a cliff," Clara laughed. It surprised her, the sound rusty from disuse. "There," Gideon said. "That's better. Nathaniel said you had a sense of humor in your letters. He talked about me that much?" "Constantly, those last few weeks. Drove us all half crazy with his plans. He was going to teach you to ride, show you the ranch, introduce you to everyone who mattered." Gideon's expression softened. "He was a good man, Clara. He would have made you happy, I think." "We'll never know." "No. But you're here, and that counts for something." Clara spent the rest of the afternoon learning the Silver Star's bookkeeping system, or lack thereof. The more she dug into the ledgers, the more problems she found. Not just arithmetic errors, but systematic issues that suggested someone had been taking advantage of Gideon's numerical blindness. "Who usually handles the money?" she asked, finding yet another discrepancy. "Jake, my bartender. Been with me since I opened 3 years ago." Clara made a non-committal sound, marking the page. "You think Jake's stealing?" "I think someone is." "These patterns aren't random." Gideon's face darkened. "How much?" "I won't know until I go through everything properly, but based on just this month, at least $100. He cursed, low and vicious. "That's more than some of the girls make in 2 months." "You pay them fairly." "I try to. They get half of what they bring in, plus tips. That's generous for this kind of establishment." "You know a lot about this kind of establishment?" Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I read." Boston has its share of expose articles about dance halls and their practices. Boston dance halls aren't Montana dance halls. Out here, the girls are just trying to survive, same as everyone else. As if on cue, the door opened and a woman entered. She was perhaps 25, with red hair that couldn't possibly be natural and a dress that revealed more than it concealed. She stopped short when she saw Clara. "Who's this?" "Rose, meet Clara Whitmore. She's our new bookkeeper. Clara, this is Rose, one of our dancers." Rose's painted lips curved in a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "The mail order bride. Heard about you. Just Clara now." "Sure, honey. We're all just something here." Rose turned to Gideon. "Jake's downstairs, says we're out of the good whiskey. We can't be." "I just ordered—" Gideon stopped, glancing at Clara. "Check the inventory list, would you?" Clara found the relevant page. "You ordered 12 bottles last week. According to this, you've sold 15. Son of a—" "Also," Clara continued, "the entry's been altered. See the smudge? Someone changed a 2 to a 5. Rose whistled low. "Jake's been skimming more than cream, sounds like." "I'll handle it," Gideon said grimly. "Want backup?" Rose offered. "No, but thanks." After he left, Rose studied Clara with frank curiosity. "You really came all the way from Boston to marry Nathaniel Harrington?" "That was the plan." "Hell of a plan, though I guess mine wasn't much better. Came from Chicago to be an actress. Ended up shaking my tail for cowboys who can't tell Shakespeare from Shinola." "You know Shakespeare?" "Honey, I know lots of things that would surprise you." Rose's expression softened slightly. "This isn't a bad place, despite what you might think. Gideon takes care of us. Doesn't let the men get too familiar, doesn't take more than his fair share. You could do worse." "I already have." "Haven't we all?" Rose moved to leave, then paused. "Word of advice? Don't let them see you limp more than necessary. Shows weakness, and weakness attracts the wrong kind of attention. I can't exactly hide it. No, but you can make them forget about it. Give them something else to look at, think about. You're smart. Gideon wouldn't have hired you otherwise. Use that." After Rose left, Clara sat alone in the office, listening to the sounds of the Silver Star coming alive for the evening. She could hear Gideon's voice, low and dangerous, presumably dealing with Jake. She heard laughter, the clink of glasses, the first tentative notes from the piano. This was her life now. Not a ranch with a respectable widower, but a dance hall with questionable morals and definitely questionable accounting. She pulled the ledger closer and began to work, losing herself in the clean logic of numbers. Outside the window, the sun set over Clearwater, painting the sky the color of whiskey and promises. By the time Gideon returned, Clara had found 3 more instances of theft and 2 probable accomplices. "Jake?" she asked. "Gone. Put him on his horse myself, with a strong suggestion he keep riding. He won't be happy about that. He's lucky I didn't shoot him." Clara looked up from the ledger. "Would you have—" "No, but he doesn't know that." "You're not quite what you seem, are you, Mr. Hale?" "Neither are you, Miss Whitmore." They stared at each other for a moment, 2 people who'd taken unexpected turns and ended up in the same unlikely place. "There are 2 others," Clara said finally. "Sam, who works the stables, and someone called Dutch. Dutch deals faro in the back room." Gideon sighed. "I liked Dutch." "I'm sorry." "Don't be. Better to know." He gestured to the ledgers spread across the desk. "How bad is it overall?" "You're salvageable, but you need better controls, regular audits, and someone watching the watchers." "That would be you." "If you'll have me." "Clara, I'd be a fool not to have you. Nathaniel saw something in those letters, and now I see it too." "What's that?" "Grit. Pure, uncompromising grit." From below came the sound of music starting in earnest, piano and fiddle joining in a lively tune. Clara could hear boots on boards, laughter, the peculiar energy of people determined to forget their troubles for a few hours. "I should go," she said. "You could stay." "See what you've gotten yourself into." Clara considered it. Then she thought about returning to Mrs. Haversham's boarding house, to the narrow room and narrow minds waiting there. Perhaps for a few minutes. Gideon smiled. "Come on.
I'll introduce you to the girls properly. They should know who's handling their money. The main floor of the Silver Star was transformed. What had been empty space that afternoon was now crowded with men, cowboys, miners, railroad workers, all looking for entertainment. The girls worked the room with practiced ease, bright splashes of color among the dust and denim. Clara stayed close to the bar, trying not to notice the stares her presence attracted. She was obviously out of place in her brown wool dress, like a sparrow among peacocks. "That's Belle," Gideon said, pointing to a blonde woman dancing with a cowboy who looked barely old enough to shave. "She's from New Orleans, or so she claims." "Stella's the brunette by the piano. She actually can sing when she tries. And you've met Rose." "How many girls work here?" "8 regular, a few who come and go. They're independent contractors, you might say. And they're all just dancers?" "What they do on their own time is their business. But in my establishment, they dance, they serve drinks, they provide companionship of the talking variety, nothing more. That's unusually principled. Or unusually practical. Keeping it clean keeps the law away." A man approached the bar, weaving slightly. He was young, handsome in a rough way, with the kind of confidence that came from never having been seriously challenged. "Gideon, there's the man of the hour. Pour me a whiskey and tell me who this lovely lady is." "Evening, Robert. This is Miss Whitmore, our new bookkeeper." Robert's eyes traveled down Clara's form, lingering pointedly on her twisted foot. "Bookkeeper, huh? That all she's keeping?" "Watch your mouth, Sinclair. Just asking. Seems a shame to waste even damaged goods." The words hit Clara like a physical blow. Damaged goods. She'd heard it before, but somehow here, in this place where she'd just begun to feel the smallest bit of belonging, it cut deeper. "Robert," Gideon's voice was dangerously quiet, "you're going to apologize to the lady, and then you're going to leave." "Or what? You'll throw me out? My father owns half this town, and I own this half. Apologize." Robert laughed. "For speaking the truth? Everyone can see she's a cripple. Probably why that rancher died. Took one look at what was coming off the train and his heart gave out." Clara didn't remember moving, but suddenly her hand was connecting with Robert's face, the crack of the slap audible even over the music. The room went silent. Robert touched his reddening cheek, his expression shifting from surprise to rage. "You little—" He raised his hand, but Gideon caught his wrist, twisting it behind his back in one smooth motion. "You're done here," Gideon said. "Don't come back." "You can't ban me. My father can take it up with me personally." Gideon marched Robert to the door, tossing him into the street with little ceremony. When he returned, the entire room was staring at Clara. "Show's over," Gideon announced. "Music." The piano started up again, tentative at first, then with growing confidence. Gradually the normal noise resumed, though Clara could still feel eyes on her. "I shouldn't have done that," she said quietly. "No," Gideon agreed. "You should have hit him harder." Clara looked up, surprised, and found him grinning. That was Robert Sinclair, Jr. His father owns the bank, which means Junior thinks he owns everything else. He's had that coming for years. "His father owns the bank," Clara repeated, "and I just slapped him. Spectacularly. Rose is already composing a song about it. This isn't funny. I could have just cost you business. Or gained me some. Half the town hates the Sinclairs. The other half just pretends to like them." "And which half are you?" "The half that doesn't give a damn either way." Rose appeared at Clara's elbow, pressing a glass into her hand. "Whiskey, you need it. I don't drink." "You do now." That was magnificent, by the way. The look on his face. Rose laughed, bright and genuine. "Oh, honey, you're going to fit in here just fine." Clara sipped the whiskey, coughing as it burned her throat. Around her, the Silver Star spun on, music and laughter, and the business of forgetting. She thought about Mrs. Haversham's boarding house, about the narrow room she'd paid for but might not return to. "The room," she said to Gideon, "the one you mentioned. Is it really private?" "Completely." "Want to see it?" She nodded, following him back upstairs, past the office to a door at the end of the hall. The room was small but clean, with a brass bed, a wardrobe, and a window overlooking the back alley. It was 3 times the size of her room at Mrs. Haversham's. "There's a back entrance," Gideon said,
showing her a second door that led to an external staircase. You can come and go without going through the saloon. And the rent? Included in your salary, if you want it. Clara walked to the window, looking out at the darkening town. Somewhere out there was Nathaniel Harrington's ranch, the home that should have been hers. Somewhere was the life she'd imagined on all those long train rides through prairie and mountain. But that life had died with a man she'd never met, and this was what remained: a dance hall, a ledger full of problems, and a town that would gossip about her choice for years to come. I'll need my things from the boarding house. I'll send someone for them. Mrs. Haversham won't like it. Mrs. Haversham doesn't like anything. At least this way she'll have something new to disapprove of. Clara turned from the window. Why are you doing this? Really? Gideon was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was thoughtful. You know what Nathaniel told me about your letters? He said you were honest about your circumstances, but never bitter. Said you wrote about books and ideas and dreams, even when life had given you every reason to stop dreaming. He met her eyes. That takes a particular kind of courage, and I suppose I wanted to see what that kind of courage looked like in person. And now that you've seen it, I'm impressed. Also slightly concerned you're going to hit more of my customers. Only the ones who deserve it. That could be a long list. Despite everything, the upheaval, the uncertainty, the complete destruction of every plan she'd made, Clara smiled. Then I suppose I'd better learn to hit harder. The next morning arrived with a pounding on Clara's door that jolted her from restless sleep. For a moment she forgot where she was, the unfamiliar ceiling, the bigger bed, the absence of Mrs. Haversham's perpetual disapproval seeping through thin walls. Then memory crashed back. She lived above a dance hall now. She was the bookkeeper for the Silver Star. Miss Clara? It was Rose's voice, unusually early for someone who'd worked until past midnight. You need to come downstairs. There's a situation. Clara dressed quickly, her fingers fumbling with buttons as she wondered what could constitute a situation at 7 in the morning. The saloon was closed, wouldn't open until noon. She made her way down the back stairs, her legs stiff from yesterday's exertions. The main floor looked different in morning light, shabbier, but somehow more honest, like a theater with its curtains pulled back. Gideon stood near the bar with a man she didn't recognize, weathered and lean with the kind of sun-damaged skin that spoke of years working cattle. Clara, this is Jim Morrison, Gideon said without preamble. He was Nathaniel's foreman. The foreman removed his hat, revealing thinning hair the color of dust. Ma'am, I apologize for the early hour, but we got ourselves a problem out at the ranch. I don't understand, Clara said. What does Nathaniel's ranch have to do with me? Morrison and Gideon exchanged glances that made Clara's stomach tighten. Thing is, Morrison said slowly, Mr. Harrington changed his will 3 weeks back, left the whole spread to his intended bride. That would be you, ma'am. Clara gripped the back of a chair. That's impossible. We never met. We weren't married. Don't matter. Will's legal, filed with Judge Patterson. The ranch, the cattle, the whole operation. It's yours. The room seemed to tilt. Clara sat down hard, her mind racing through implications she couldn't quite grasp. But surely there are other heirs. Family? None that anyone knows about. Nathaniel was alone except for Martha, and when she died. Morrison shrugged. Well, he had the ranch and not much else until your letters started coming. The problem, Gideon interjected, is that Robert Sinclair Sr. is claiming the ranch should go to the bank. Says Nathaniel owed money. Did he? Clara asked. Some, Morrison admitted. Maybe $500. But the ranch is worth 10 times that, maybe more with the cattle. Sinclair's being a vulture, circling because he knows you're alone and new here. Clara's mind shifted into the calculating mode that had served her well with ledgers. What's the payment schedule on the loan? Monthly installments of $50. We're current through this month. And the ranch income? Good when we can get the cattle to market. We got about 200 head ready to drive to the railroad at Billings. When? Should have been last week, but with Mr. Harrington dying and all the confusion. How much would the sale bring him? Morrison calculated. Maybe $3,000, after expenses. $3,000. Enough to pay off the loan entirely, with plenty left over. Clara stood, her decision made before she fully understood she was making it. We need to see this Judge Patterson, she said, and then we need to get those cattle to market. Ma'am, with respect, Morrison said, you don't know nothing about running a ranch. No, Clara agreed. But I know about running numbers, and right now the numbers say that ranch is too valuable to let Sinclair steal it. She looked at Gideon. Will you come with me? Wouldn't miss it, he said, already reaching for his coat. Rose, tell anyone who asks that we'll be back by evening. Rose, who'd been listening from the doorway, grinned. Going to war with the Sinclairs twice in 2 days, Clara. You sure you're from Boston and not Texas? Judge Patterson's office was in the courthouse, a grand name for a 2-story building that also housed the jail and the tax assessor. The judge himself was older than Clara expected, with white whiskers and sharp eyes that missed nothing. Miss Whitmore, he said after reviewing the will, this document is legal and binding. Mr. Harrington filed it himself, in sound mind and body. The ranch is yours. But she never married him, Sinclair Sr. protested. He was an older, harder version of his son, same arrogance but with the intelligence to back it up. Surely that invalidates, the will says intended bride, not wife, Judge Patterson interrupted. And Miss Whitmore can prove she was that. I assume you have the correspondence? Clara produced Nathaniel's letters from her bag, grateful she'd thought to bring them. The judge read through several, his expression softening. These clearly establish a relationship and intention to marry. The will stands. Then I'll call in the loan, Sinclair said smoothly. Full payment, immediately. The loan agreement specifies monthly payments, Clara said. You can't change the terms simply because you don't like who inherited. Can't I? Sinclair smiled, cold as January wind. That agreement was with Nathaniel. He's dead. Makes it void, I'd say. Then I'd say you're wrong, Judge Patterson said firmly. Debts transfer with property, Mr. Sinclair. As long as Miss Whitmore maintains the payment schedule, you have no grounds to call in the full amount. Sinclair's face darkened. We'll see about that. No Eastern spinster is going to. Careful, Gideon said quietly. That Eastern spinster already put your boy on his ass yesterday. Wouldn't test her further. Is that a threat, Hale? It's a reminder that Miss Whitmore has friends here. She's not as alone as you might think. They left the courthouse with the deed to the ranch and Sinclair's fury following them like smoke. Clara's hands shook slightly as she folded the legal papers into her bag. He won't give up, she said. No, Gideon agreed. But now you've got legal standing. That's more than you had an hour ago. Morrison had waited with the wagon, and he helped Clara up onto the bench with surprising gentleness. Ranch is about 5 miles north, he said. Road's rough. It was more than rough. It was a torture of ruts and rocks that had Clara gripping the bench to keep from being thrown off. Her bad leg protested every bounce, but she kept her expression neutral. Morrison and Gideon talked around her, discussing cattle prices and weather patterns and the dozen other things that apparently mattered in ranch life. Then they crested a rise, and Clara saw it. The ranch spread out below them like something from a painting. A modest 2-story house with a wrapped porch, a large barn, several outbuildings, and beyond them, pastures that seemed to run forever. Cattle dotted the landscape, black and brown against the golden grass. Mountains rose in the distance, purple-blue and capped with early snow. Oh, Clara breathed. It's something, isn't it? Morrison said with pride. Nathaniel and Martha built it from nothing. 20 years of work in every board and fence post. They rolled down to the house, and Clara saw what Nathaniel had described in his letters. The garden plot waiting for spring, the chicken coop, the root cellar. Everything practical, everything with purpose. But there were touches of beauty too. Roses climbing the porch posts, curtains in the windows, a swing hanging from a large oak. Inside was even more surprising. Clara had expected bachelor simplicity, but the house was carefully maintained, even elegant in its frontier way. The parlor had a settee and matching chairs, obviously ordered from a catalog. The kitchen was large and well-equipped, and upstairs in what would have been her room. Clara stopped in the doorway, her throat tight. Nathaniel had prepared it for her. There was a new brass bed with a quilt and wedding ring pattern, a vanity with a mirror, a bookshelf, empty but waiting. On the vanity was a note in handwriting she recognized from his letters. For Clara, with hope. He spent the last month getting it ready, Morrison said quietly. Ordered things from Denver, had Mrs. Morrison make the quilt. He wanted you to feel welcomed. Clara picked up the note, the paper crisp beneath her fingers. This man she'd never met had prepared a home for her, had died before he could share it, and had still found a way to give it to her. The cattle, she said, needing to focus on practicality before emotion overwhelmed her. You said they need to go to market. Yes, ma'am. But we need at least 6 men for a drive, and we only got 4. Most of the good hands are already hired on for other spreads. What about hiring from town? Morrison snorted. The kind of men looking for work in town aren't the kind you want on a cattle drive. Clara looked at Gideon. What about your customers? Surely some of them know cattle. Most of them just know how to drink near cattle, Gideon said. But, he paused, thinking. There's a few. Tom Brennan from the Lazy K might do it for extra money. And there's a drifter named Wade who's good with horses when he's sober. Can you get them? I can try. When would you need to leave? Day after tomorrow at the latest, Morrison said. Any longer and we risk weather. They spent the rest of the day at the ranch. Clara went through Nathaniel's papers, finding them surprisingly organized. The man who couldn't spell her name right half the time had kept meticulous records of his cattle, his expenses, his plans. She found sketches for a larger barn, notes about breeding programs, even a list titled Things Clara Might Like that included books, a piano, and surprisingly, a horse gentle enough for her foot. He noticed, she murmured, touching the words. Noticed what? Gideon asked from the doorway. My limp. In my letters I told him about it, but I never said which foot or how it affected my movement. But he noticed from how I described things, made plans around it. She gestured to the list. A gentle horse. Not because I'm a woman, but specifically for my foot. He was observant about things that mattered. As the sun began to sink, they headed back to town. Clara was quiet, overwhelmed by the weight of what she'd inherited. Not just land and cattle, but a dead man's dreams. I don't know how to do this, she admitted as they reached the Silver Star. Do what? Any of it. Run a ranch, manage cattle, be what he imagined I could be. Gideon stopped the wagon, turning to face her fully. Clara, you crossed half a continent to marry a stranger. You took a job in a dance hall when every respectable door closed. You slapped Robert Sinclair Jr. in front of 40 witnesses. I think you can figure out cattle. That night, Clara worked the books at the Silver Star while below her, music and laughter filled the air. She'd divided her ledger into 2 sections, one for the saloon, one for the ranch. The numbers for both were challenging but not impossible. If she could get the cattle to market, if she could maintain the payment schedule, if she could find reliable hands. A knock interrupted her calculations. Rose entered with a tray of food and a knowing smile. You missed dinner. Figured you'd be up here drowning in numbers. Thank you. Clara accepted the plate gratefully, realizing she hadn't eaten since morning. Rose perched on the edge of the desk, an informality that would have scandalized Boston, but seemed natural here. So you're a ranch owner now? Apparently. And you're keeping the bookkeeping job? I need the income until the ranch is profitable. Smart. Though folks will talk about you living here while owning property. Folks are already talking. True. Rose picked at a thread on her dress. Can I ask you something? Why didn't you go back? After Nathaniel died, I mean. You could have gone back to Boston. Clara considered the question. There's nothing there for me. I sold everything to come here. But surely you have family, friends. I have a cousin who made it clear I'd overstayed my welcome after my parents died. As for friends. Clara shrugged. It's hard to maintain friendships when you can't afford to reciprocate social calls. So you're stuck here. Or I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. I haven't decided yet. Rose laughed. That's the spirit. Though I have to say, for someone who was supposed to be a respectable rancher's wife, you're taking to the disreputable life pretty well. Perhaps I was never as respectable as I pretended. None of us are, honey. That's the secret everyone knows, but nobody admits. After Rose left, Clara returned to her calculations, but her mind kept wandering to the ranch, to that empty bookshelf waiting for her books, to the quilt made by a stranger's hands for a marriage that would never happen. The next morning brought Tom Brennan to the Silver Star's back door. He stood, hat in hand, his weathered face skeptical. "Gideon says you need hands for a drive." "I do." "Morrison can give you the details, but it's 200 head to Billings. Standard wages plus a bonus if we make good time." "Why should I risk my job at the Lazy K to help you?" Clara met his eyes steadily. "Because the Lazy K underpays you, and we both know it. Because you're tired of being treated like furniture. And because if this drive succeeds, I'll need permanent hands, good ones. You offering me a job? I'm offering you a chance. What you do with it is up to you." Tom considered this, then nodded slowly. "I'll talk to Morrison." Wade the Drifter was harder to convince, mainly because he was drunk when Gideon found him. It took black coffee and brutal honesty to get him coherent enough to agree. "I don't work for women," he said flatly. "You work for Morrison," Clara countered. "I just sign your pay." "What if I don't like taking orders from Morrison neither?" "Then you don't eat." "Your choice." Wade squinted at her, swaying slightly. "You always this harsh?" "I'm from Boston." "We perfect harsh winters and harsh women both." He barked a laugh. "Fair enough. When do we leave?" They had 4 hired hands plus Morrison's regular crew, barely enough, but it would have to do. Clara spent the evening before the drive at the ranch, going over plans with Morrison. She'd stay behind with Mrs. Morrison to watch the remaining cattle and manage the property. "You sure you want to do this?" Morrison asked. "Ranch can be lonely for a woman alone." "I won't be alone. Mrs. Morrison will check on me, and I'll have work to keep me busy." "It's not the work I'm worried about. Sinclair's not going to sit idle while you establish yourself. Then I'll have to establish myself quickly." The morning of the drive, Clara stood on the ranch house porch, watching the men prepare. The cattle lowed and milled, raising dust that turned golden in the early light. Morrison directed the organized chaos with sharp whistles and sharper words. Gideon had come to see them off, bringing supplies from town. He stood beside Clara, both of them watching the preparation. "It's like a dance," Clara observed. "Everyone knows their steps except me." "You'll learn, or you'll find people who can dance for you." "Is that what you did?" "With the Silver Star?" "In a way. I'm good at reading people, terrible at reading numbers. So I found Nathaniel to help with the books, and when he was gone, I found you." "What happens when I'm gone?" Gideon turned to look at her. "You planning on leaving?" "No, but plans change. Nathaniel proved that." "True enough." He was quiet for a moment. "But something tells me you're harder to kill than he was." Morrison approached, touching his hat brim. "We're ready, Miss Clara. Should be back in a week, God willing." "Be careful," Clara said. "Always am. You watch yourself here. Keep the rifle handy, and don't trust nobody who comes calling unexpected." They watched the drive move out, 200 head of cattle flowing like a brown river across the grassland. Clara stood on the porch until they disappeared over a rise, taking her best chance at financial stability with them. "Well," she said to Gideon, "now we wait." "Now you work," he corrected. "Ranch doesn't run itself, even with most of the cattle gone." He was right. Claire spent the next days learning the rhythm of ranch life from Mrs. Morrison, a stout woman who seemed amused by Clara's ignorance but patient with her education. There were chickens to feed, eggs to gather, a vegetable garden to tend. The remaining cattle needed checking, fences needed mending, and a dozen other tasks Clara had never imagined. Her leg ached constantly from the physical work, but she found a strange satisfaction in it. In Boston, her disability had defined her limitations. Here, it was simply another challenge to work around, no different from not knowing how to milk a cow or repair a gate. On the 3rd day, she had her first real test. She was alone at the ranch, Mrs. Morrison having returned to her own home when riders approached. 3 men, none of whom she recognized. Clara retrieved Nathaniel's rifle from above the door, checking it was loaded before stepping onto the porch. "Gentlemen," she called when they were within earshot. "State your business." The lead rider, a thin man with a scar across his jaw, smiled unpleasantly. Just checking on our new neighbor. Heard Nathaniel's bride inherited the place. You heard correctly. And you are? Name's Dixon. I work for Mr. Sinclair. Clara's grip on the rifle tightened. Then you know this is private property. Now, no need for hostility. Mr. Sinclair just wanted us to remind you that his offer stands. He'll buy the ranch for a fair price, save you the trouble of trying to run it. What price would that be? $2,000? Cash. Clara almost laughed. The cattle alone were worth more than that. Tell Mr. Sinclair's definition of fair and mine differ significantly. That's a mistake, miss. This territory ain't kind to women alone. Good thing I'm not alone then. As if on cue, another rider appeared on the horizon, moving fast. Clara recognized Gideon's tall frame and felt relief wash through her. Gentlemen, Gideon said as he reined up, his hand resting casually on his pistol. Dixon. Heard you were out making social calls. Just being neighborly, Hale. Your version of neighborly looks a lot like trespassing. Best move along. Dixon's scarred face twisted. This ain't your business. Miss Whitmore is my bookkeeper. Her welfare is absolutely my business. The men stared at each other, tension crackling like lightning before a storm. Finally, Dixon wheeled his horse around. This ain't over, he told Clara. Mr. Sinclair don't give up easy. They rode off, and Clara finally lowered the rifle, her hands trembling slightly. You all right? Gideon asked, dismounting. Fine. How did you know to come? Mrs. Morrison saw them heading this way, rode to town to tell me. Figured you might need backup. I had the rifle. Would you have used it? Clara considered the question. If I had to. That's what I figured. But better if you don't have to. He studied her, taking in her dust-covered dress and the determined set of her jaw. You look like a rancher. I look like someone playing at being a rancher. Same thing, at first. Everyone starts by pretending until one day they're not. That evening, Clara sat at Nathaniel's desk, her desk now, going through more of his papers. She found contracts with buyers, correspondence with other ranchers, plans and dreams sketched in margins. The man emerged from his documents like a photograph developing, practical, ambitious, lonely. In the bottom drawer, wrapped in oilcloth, she found more letters. Her letters. Every one she'd written him, carefully preserved. Some had notes in the margins. Clever. Made me laugh. Read this 3 times. The last letter, dated 2 weeks before her arrival, had a longer note. Tomorrow, I file the will. Jim thinks I'm crazy, leaving everything to a woman I've never met. But I've met her in these pages, seen her mind work, felt her humor and her hurt. If something happens to me, at least she'll have a chance at the life she deserves. Martha would understand. I think she'd like Clara. Clara pressed her fingers to her eyes, fighting tears. This man had seen her truly, had valued her beyond her body's limitations, had tried to give her a future even in death. A sound outside made her look up. Horses, several of them, riding fast. Clara grabbed the rifle again, but then she heard Morrison's distinctive whistle. They were back. She ran outside, her limp more pronounced in her haste. The men looked exhausted but triumphant, and Morrison was grinning beneath the dust. How did it go? Clara called. Better than expected. Morrison swung down from his horse. Got $20 ahead instead of 15. Fellow from Chicago was buying for the stockyards, desperate for beef. $4,000 instead of $3,000. Clara calculated quickly, enough to pay off the loan entirely and still have substantial operating capital. And, Tom Brennan added, writing up, we made some connections. Other buyers interested in regular sales, if we can maintain the herd. We could have steady income, Clara finished, enough to expand, improve, maybe even hire more hands. That's the idea, Morrison agreed. Of course, it means you're staying, running this place proper. Clara looked around at the ranch, at the men who'd risked the drive for her, at Gideon watching from his horse with that unreadable expression. I'm staying, she said. The next morning, Clara walked into the Clearwater Bank with Morrison and Gideon flanking her. Sinclair sat behind his massive desk like a spider in an oak web, his smile faltering when he saw the bank draft in her hand. I'm here to pay off Nathaniel's loan, Clara said, placing the draft on his desk. In full. That's not possible, The drive couldn't have. $20 a head, Mr. Sinclair. Chicago buyers pay well for quality beef. His face darkened, but he had no choice but to accept the payment. As he wrote the receipt, his pen scratching angrily, he said, "This doesn't change anything. A woman can't run a ranch alone." "Good thing I'm not alone, then. These men won't stay. Loyalty's cheap out here." "Cheaper than respect?" Clara asked. "Because I pay both fair wages and fair respect. You might try it sometime." She took the receipt and turned to leave, but Sinclair's voice followed her. "You think you've won something, but you've just painted a target on your back. Every rustler, every hard case, every man who thinks a woman alone is easy prey, they'll come calling." Clara looked back at him, remembering all the times in Boston she'd been dismissed, overlooked, underestimated. "Let them come," she said. Outside, Gideon whistled low. "You surely do like making enemies." "I like making stands. If that creates enemies, so be it." Morrison headed back to the ranch to pay the men their bonuses, leaving Clara and Gideon to walk down Main Street. The town looked different to her now, not a place of exile, but a place of possibility. "Thank you," she told Gideon, "for everything. The job, the support, the backup with Dixon. You'd have managed without me. Maybe. But I'm glad I didn't have to." They'd reached the Silver Star. Through the windows, Clara could see Rose preparing for the evening crowd, arranging chairs and tables. "You coming in?" Gideon asked. "Books probably need updating after the drive." "In a moment." Clara stood outside looking up at the building that had become her unlikely salvation. A dance hall. A place her Boston self would have crossed streets to avoid. But here, it had given her work, shelter, and something she hadn't expected. Acceptance. She thought about Nathaniel's ranch waiting for her, about the empty bookshelf and the garden plot and all the dreams buried with a man she'd never met. She thought about Morrison and his crew, about Mrs. Morrison's practical kindness, about Tom Brennan taking a chance on her leadership. And she thought about Gideon Hale, who'd seen her at her lowest and offered her a ladder to climb. Inside, Rose was singing something low and sweet, practicing for the evening. Clara pushed through the doors, ready to balance two sets of books, two different lives that had somehow become one. "Hey, boss lady," Rose called. "Heard you paid off Sinclair." Wish I could have seen his face. It was satisfying, Clara admitted. Bet it was. You staying out at the ranch now? Some nights. Still have work here. And Gideon still has you here, Rose said with a knowing smile. Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks. It's not like that. Honey, it's always like that, even when it's not. Man doesn't ride out to save just anybody from Dixon's boys. Before Clara could respond, the door burst open. Wade stumbled in, his face flushed with drink and excitement. "Miss Clara! You got to come quick. There's trouble at the ranch." Clara's blood chilled. What kind of trouble? Fire. Someone set fire to the barn. Clara ran despite her legs' protests, Gideon and Rose close behind as they raced toward the ranch. The orange glow was visible from a mile away, painting the evening sky with hellish light. By the time they arrived, Morrison and his men had formed a bucket brigade from the well, but the barn was already half consumed. "The horses!" Morrison shouted over the roar of flames. "We got most out, but Thunder's still trapped in the back stall." Thunder was Nathaniel's prize stallion, worth more than most men made in a year. Without thinking, Clara started toward the burning structure, but Gideon caught her arm. "You can't go in there." "Someone has to. Then it'll be me." He was already moving, pulling his shirt up over his nose and mouth. Clara watched in terror as Gideon disappeared into the smoke. The seconds stretched like hours. Tom Brennan appeared at her side with another bucket, his face grim. "This weren't no accident," he said quietly. "Found lamp oil splashed on the back wall." Before Clara could respond, Gideon emerged from the inferno, leading a terrified Thunder whose coat was singed but who was miraculously alive. The horse bolted toward the pasture the moment he was clear, and Gideon collapsed to his knees, coughing violently. Clara dropped beside him, her hands checking for burns. His shirt was charred in places, and there were angry red marks on his arms, but nothing that looked life-threatening. "You fool," she said, her voice shaking. "You absolute fool."
Nice to see you too, he rasped, managing a weak grin. The barn collapsed with a tremendous crash, sending sparks spiraling into the darkening sky. Morrison ordered everyone back, and they could only watch as 20 years of Nathaniel's work turned to ash. At least we saved the horses, Morrison said heavily, and the hay was mostly stored elsewhere. But all the tack, the tools... We'll rebuild, Clara said firmly. Insurance? Nathaniel never believed in it, said it was Eastern nonsense. Another financial blow. Clara calculated quickly. The remaining drive money would have to cover rebuilding, and there'd be nothing left for improvements or expansion. Miss Clara, Wade called from near the ruins. You need to see this. He'd found something in the grass where the arsonist must have stood, a distinctive silver button with the Sinclair Ranch brand embossed on it. That's from their fancy riding coats, Tom said. Only Sinclair's men wear those. Clara pocketed the button, rage building in her chest. First the intimidation, now this. Sinclair wasn't just trying to buy her out. He was trying to burn her out. We're going to the sheriff, she announced. Won't do no good, Morrison said. Sheriff Daniels is Sinclair's cousin. Then we go to Judge Patterson. With what proof? A button that could have been dropped any time? Clara felt the weight of Western justice, or its absence. In Boston, there were laws, procedures, systems. Here, there was power and those who wielded it. So we do nothing. We be smart, Gideon said, his voice still rough from smoke. We don't play Sinclair's game. We play our own. They spent the night salvaging what they could from around the burned barn. Clara worked alongside the men, her dress ruined beyond repair, her hands blistered from handling hot debris. Mrs. Morrison arrived with food and bandages, clucking over Gideon's burns like a mother hen. You saved Thunder, the older woman told him. Nathaniel would have been grateful. He loved that horse more than most people. As dawn broke over the blackened ruins, Clara stood apart, assessing the damage. The barn was gone, but the house stood untouched. The cattle were safe in the pastures. They'd survived, but barely. You should get some rest, Gideon said, approaching with 2 cups of coffee. His arms were wrapped in white bandages, making him look like a partially mummified gunfighter. Can't rest. Too much to figure out. She accepted the coffee gratefully. I need lumber for rebuilding, but I can't afford it. I need to protect the ranch, but I can't fight Sinclair's money. You need help, and you're going to get it. From who? The whole town's either scared of Sinclair or owned by him. Not the whole town. Gideon was quiet for a moment, seeming to weigh his words. There's something I haven't told you about the Silver Star. Clara raised an eyebrow, waiting. It's not just a dance hall. It's also, call it a gathering place for people who don't fit Sinclair's vision of Clearwater. Ranchers he's squeezed out, miners he's cheated, women who won't play by his rules. We've been watching him get fatter and meaner for years, but nobody's had the guts to stand up to him. And you think I do? I think you slapped his son in front of 40 witnesses and paid off his loan with money he thought he'd stolen from you. Yeah, I think you've got the guts. Guts don't rebuild barns. No, but community does. Gideon smiled. What if I told you that by tomorrow afternoon you'd have 20 people here ready to help raise a new barn? I'd say you're either overly optimistic or slightly delirious from smoke inhalation. Maybe both, but I'm also right. He was. The next day, wagons began arriving before noon. First came the surprising ones, several of the Silver Star's girls trading their evening finery for practical dresses and determined expressions. Rose led them, her red hair tied back with a bandana. Don't look so shocked, she told Clara. We know something about starting over after men try to burn us down. Then came others. Tom Brennan, with 3 friends from neighboring ranches, all men who'd felt Sinclair's squeeze. The owner of the hardware store arrived with a wagon full of lumber. Store credit, he said when Clara protested. Pay when you can. Sinclair don't own the only business in town. Even Mrs. Haversham appeared, bringing her 3 remaining boarders and enough food to feed an army. Still don't approve of your choices, she told Clara stiffly. But burning folks out is unchristian. Even loose women deserve better than that. By evening, the skeleton of a new barn stood where the old one had burned. It was smaller, simpler, but it was there, a defiant finger raised to anyone watching from town.
Judge Patterson himself rode out as the sun set, surveying the construction with interest. "Heard you had some trouble," he said to Clara. "Heard you can't do anything about it," she replied. "Officially, number. That button proves nothing." He paused. "Unofficially, I'm glad to see the community coming together." Sinclair's had his boot on this town's neck for too long. "And you're the judge. Why haven't you done something?" "Because judges need evidence, Miss Whitmore." And Sinclair's careful. But he's also arrogant, and arrogant men make mistakes. When he does, I'll be ready. As the helpers departed, Clara stood with Morrison and Gideon, looking at their day's work. The barn still needed walls and a roof, but the framework was solid. "We'll finish tomorrow," Morrison said. "Few more days. It'll be like the fire never happened." "Except for the debt," Clara said quietly. "I'm back to scraping by, hoping nothing else goes wrong." "About that," Gideon said, "I have a proposition." Clara turned to him, wary. "What kind of proposition?" "A partnership. The Silver Star needs beef for the restaurant side. Yeah, we serve food too. You just haven't seen that part. You provide the cattle at a fair price. I provide steady income. Contract for a year, paid monthly. That's charity. That's business. I'm already buying beef from Sinclair's ranch, and I'd rather choke than keep doing it." Morrison nodded approvingly. "It's a good deal, Miss Clara." "Steady money makes all the difference out here." Clara studied Gideon's face, looking for pity or condescension. She found neither, just that steady whiskey-brown gaze that seemed to see straight through her. "Full market price," she said. "Market price minus 10%. I'm taking a risk on a new supplier. 5%. Deal." They shook on it, and Clara felt something shift. She wasn't just surviving now, she was building something. The next week passed in a blur of construction and calculation. The barn rose wall by wall, and Clara split her time between the ranch and the Silver Star's books. She'd found more evidence of the previous embezzlement, enough to potentially prosecute if Jake ever showed his face again. One evening, as she worked in the office above the saloon, she heard commotion downstairs. Angry voices, then the crash of breaking glass. She descended quickly to find chaos. Robert Sinclair Jr. stood in the middle of the room with 4 friends, all drunk and belligerent. A table was overturned, and Belle sat on the floor, her lip bleeding. "Just having some fun," Robert slurred when he saw Clara. "Oh, look, it's the crippled bookkeeper. Shouldn't you be limping around your burned barn?" "Get out," Clara said quietly. "Or what? You'll hit me again?" He laughed. "Go ahead. My father owns the sheriff now. Bought him last week." Gideon emerged from behind the bar, and the room tensed, but Clara held up her hand, stopping him. "You're right," she told Robert. "I can't throw you out. I'm just a crippled woman who can barely walk straight." She moved closer, her limp pronounced. "But you know what I can do? I can make sure every rancher in 3 counties knows that Sinclair beef comes from diseased cattle." Robert's face paled. "That's a lie." "Is it? Who's going to check? Your bought sheriff? And even if it's proved false eventually, how much business will you lose in the meantime?" "You wouldn't dare. I'm a desperate woman with nothing left to lose." "Try me." Father and son were more alike than they knew, both bullies who crumbled when faced with someone who wouldn't back down. Robert gestured to his friends, and they slouched toward the door. "This isn't over," he said, echoing his father's threat. "No," Clara agreed. "It's just beginning." After they left, Clara helped Belle to her feet, dabbing at the cut lip with a handkerchief. "You shouldn't have challenged him," Belle said. "Now they'll come after you harder." "They were always going to come after me. At least now it's in the open." Gideon was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. That was either very brave or very stupid. "Probably both, seems to be my pattern lately." "It's a good pattern. Interesting, anyway." Rose appeared with a broom for the broken glass. "You know, Clara, for someone who is supposed to be a quiet rancher's wife, you surely do stir up trouble." Maybe that's exactly why I couldn't be a quiet rancher's wife. The truth of it settled over her. Even if Nathaniel had lived, even if they'd married as planned, she would never have been the docile frontier wife he probably expected. Her nature was too sharp, too restless. too unwilling to accept the world as it was. That night, she stayed at the ranch, unable to face the noise and energy of the Silver Star. She sat on the porch Nathaniel had built for a wife he'd never meet, watching stars emerge in the vast Montana sky. Morrison appeared from the shadows, settling beside her with the ease of a man who'd spent his life outdoors. "Mind if I speak plain, Miss Clara?" "When have you ever not?" He chuckled. "Fair point. Thing is, Mr. Harrington was my friend for 20 years. I watched him build this place board by board, watched him bury Martha out in the East pasture, watched him slowly give up on anything beyond cattle and whiskey. Until my letters." "Until your letters?" "Yes." He was like a young man again those last months, full of plans and dreams. Talked about teaching you to ride, about building a library for all your books, about maybe even trying for children if God was willing. Clara's throat tightened. "I didn't know about the children." He was 41, figured it was probably too late. But hope makes fools of us all. Morrison paused. "What I'm trying to say is, you've given this place life again. Not the life Nathaniel imagined maybe, but life all the same. By making enemies and starting fights. By standing up. By refusing to roll over when Sinclair pushed. By bringing people together who'd forgotten they could stand together." He stood, joints creaking. Nathaniel would be proud. After Morrison left, Clara remained on the porch, wrestling with the weight of dead men's dreams and living women's realities. She thought about the burned barn, rebuilt by community hands, about the Silver Stars girls who'd shown up to help someone they barely knew, about Gideon's quiet support, asking for nothing beyond what she was willing to give. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. A woman Clara didn't recognize rode up, elderly but straight-backed, wearing expensive clothes that had seen better days. "Miss Whitmore? I'm Constance Hartley. I own the Double H Ranch to the south." Clara knew the name. The Double H was one of the largest spreads in the territory, though rumors said it had fallen on hard times. "Mrs. Hartley, what can I do for you?" "It's what I can do for you, dear. Or rather, what we can do for each other." The older woman dismounted with surprising agility. "May we speak inside?" Over coffee, Mrs. Hartley laid out her proposal. "Sinclair's been trying to buy me out for 3 years. I've held on, but I'm 73 and tired. My sons are dead, one in the war, one from fever. I have no one to leave the ranch to." "I'm sorry. Don't be. I've had my time. But I'll be damned if I'll let Sinclair get his hands on what my husband and I built." She leaned forward. "I want to make you my heir." Clara nearly dropped her cup. "That's... Mrs. Hartley, you don't even know me." "I know enough. You stood up to Sinclair, you're rebuilding after he tried to burn you out, and you've got half the territory's misfits ready to fight for you. That's more spine than my sons ever showed, God rest them." "But surely there's someone else. A relative, a friend. There's no one I trust to stand against Sinclair, except you." Mrs. Hartley smiled. "I'm not dying tomorrow, girl. I've got years left, hopefully, but I want my will filed proper and legal, want everyone to know that when I go, the Double H goes to you. Let Sinclair chew on that. It was too much, too fast. First Nathaniel's ranch, now this." Clara felt like she was drowning in other people's generosity. Or was it desperation? Why would you trust a stranger with your life's work? Because sometimes strangers are all we have. And because I see something in you that reminds me of myself 50 years ago, too stubborn to quit and too smart to lose. Before Clara could respond, hoofbeats announced another arrival. Gideon appeared, his face grim. "We have a problem. Sinclair's called in a federal marshal, says you threatened him and his son, claims you're inciting violence." "That's ridiculous." Of course it is, but the marshal's already in town asking questions. He'll want to talk to you." Mrs. Hartley stood. "Then he can talk to both of us. I witnessed the whole thing." "You weren't there," Clara said. "Wasn't I? At my age, dear, memory becomes quite flexible." She winked. "Besides, Sinclair's not the only one with connections. Marshal Brennan happens to be my late husband's cousin." The marshal arrived that afternoon, a weathered man with intelligent eyes who listened to all sides with practiced neutrality. Sinclair had come personally to make his case, bringing witnesses who'd clearly been paid to remember things that hadn't happened. But Clara had her own witnesses, the Silver Star girls who'd been there when Robert caused trouble, Tom Brennan, no relation to the marshal, who'd seen Dixon's intimidation tactics, and surprisingly, Judge Patterson himself. I've observed Miss Whitmore conduct herself with nothing but dignity despite severe provocation, the judge stated. If anyone's inciting violence, it's those who burn barns in the night. The marshal took it all in, then made his ruling. No federal crime has been committed. This seems to be a local matter best handled locally. He paused, looking directly at Sinclair. Though I'll be staying in town a few days. Make sure things remain peaceful. Sinclair's face was purple with rage, but he couldn't argue with federal authority. As the gathering dispersed, he stopped near Clara. You think you've won something, he hissed. But winter's coming. Cattle die in winter. Fences break. Wolves get hungry. Accidents happen. Is that a threat, Mr. Sinclair? It's a prediction. This territory's hard on women alone. Good thing I'm not alone, then. And she wasn't. As Sinclair stalked away, Clara was surrounded by her unlikely alliance. Gideon, Morrison, Mrs. Hartley, the Silver Star girls, the ranchers who'd helped rebuild her barn. They stood together in the fading afternoon light, a ragtag army of misfits and outcasts. He won't stop, Morrison said quietly. Neither will we, Clara replied. That evening, Mrs. Hartley stayed for dinner at the ranch. She and Clara sat by the fire discussing cattle prices and grazing strategies, but also books and music and dreams deferred. I wanted to be a teacher, Mrs. Hartley confided. Had the education for it, but then I met Henry, and teaching seemed less important than building something together. Do you regret it? Some days, but regret's a luxury, like clean fingernails and store-bought clothes. Out here, you do what needs doing and save philosophy for winter nights. Is that what this is? Philosophy? This is two women who've learned that sometimes the best revenge against men who diminish us is to simply survive and thrive despite them. After Mrs. Hartley left, Clara walked through her ranch in the moonlight. The new barn stood solid against the sky. The cattle lowed softly in the pastures. The house waited, warm with lamplight, filled with Nathaniel's ghost and her own growing presence. She thought about Sinclair's threats, about winter coming, about all the ways this could go wrong. But she also thought about the community that had rallied around her, about Gideon's steady support, about Mrs. Hartley's unexpected offer. The next morning brought the first snow, just a dusting, but a warning of harder times ahead. Clara stood on the porch, coffee in hand, watching the white settle over her land. Pretty, Rose said, approaching from the road. She'd ridden out early, bringing supplies from town. Pretty and dangerous. Like most things worth noticing. Rose joined her on the porch. Gideon's worried about you out here alone, especially with Sinclair making threats. I can take care of myself. No one's saying you can't, but there's no shame in accepting help. Rose paused. He's half in love with you, you know? Clara's cheeks warmed. That's ridiculous. Is it? Man doesn't rescue horses from burning barns for just anybody. Doesn't stand up to the most powerful person in the territory for a casual employee. He's honoring his friend's memory. Nathaniel's been dead for months now. This isn't about him anymore. Clara didn't know how to respond to that. Her relationship with Gideon had evolved so gradually, she hadn't noticed it changing, from employer to partner to something harder to define. It doesn't matter, she said finally. I'm not looking for that kind of complication. Honey, you inherited a ranch from a dead fiancé you never met, took a job in a dance hall, and declared war on the richest man in 3 counties. Your whole life is complications. Before Clara could argue, Morrison appeared, riding fast from the south pasture. We got problems, he called. Found 3 dead cattle, poisoned, looks like. Clara's blood chilled. It was starting. Sinclair's winter war. She grabbed Nathaniel's rifle and followed Morrison, Rose trailing behind. The cattle lay near a creek, their bodies already stiff. Morrison pointed to scattered grain nearby, tainted with something that smelled bitter and wrong. Strychnine, probably, he said grimly. Spread it knowing the cattle would find it. 3 cattle. At current prices, that was $90 gone. Clara calculated quickly. She could absorb the loss, but not many more like it. We need to move the herds away from the borders, she said. Post watches. That'll stretch us thin. Then we get creative. Hire some of the Silver Star's customers, cowboys between jobs. Pay them in room and board if we have to. Morrison nodded slowly. Could work. But Miss Clara, this is just the beginning. Sinclair's got deep pockets and a mean streak. He can outlast us. Maybe. Or maybe we outlast him. Clara looked at the dead cattle, anger burning cold in her chest. He thinks I'm weak because I'm a woman, disabled, Eastern. He thinks I'll break. Won't you? Clara thought about all the times she'd already broken. When her parents died, when her cousin made it clear she was unwelcome, when she'd stood on that empty train platform. Each time she'd pieced herself back together, harder and sharper than before. Everyone breaks, she told Morrison. The trick is choosing how you rebuild. They spent the rest of the day moving cattle and organizing watches. By evening, Clara had hired 6 men from town, drifters and drunks mostly, but men who needed work and wouldn't ask questions. She was settling the new men in the bunkhouse when Gideon arrived with a wagon full of supplies. Heard about the cattle, son, he said. Brought extra feed and some other things. The other things turned out to be weapons, rifles, ammunition, and even a shotgun. This is escalating, Clara said. It was always going to. Question is whether you're ready for it. Are you asking if I'm ready to fight a war? I'm asking if you're ready to win one. Clara looked at him. This man who ran a dance hall but carried himself like a soldier, who spoke of peace but prepared for war. What aren't you telling me about yourself? She asked. Gideon was quiet for a long moment. I wasn't always a saloon keeper. Fought in the war, Union side. Came out here to forget what I'd seen, what I'd done. The Silver Star was supposed to be my peace. And instead I found out that some fights follow you no matter how far you run. Is that what this is? Your fight following you? No, this is your fight. I'm just choosing a side. Why my side? He smiled, and for a moment, his carefully maintained walls dropped. Because you're the most interesting thing to happen to this territory in years, and because Nathaniel saw something in you worth protecting, even from beyond the grave. I don't need protecting. No, you need partnering. There's a difference. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. She walked through the house, touching things Nathaniel had placed for a bride he'd never meet. In his desk, she found more papers, including a journal she hadn't noticed before. The entries were sparse, practical mostly, but the last few months were different. They were full of Clara, her letters quoted, her ideas discussed, her potential arrival anticipated with touching eagerness. The final entry, dated the day he died, was brief. Fire in the barn. Going for the horses. If something happens, I hope Clara finds happiness here. She deserves that much. Tell her the sunrise from the east pasture is worth seeing. Tell her I'm sorry we didn't have more time. Clara closed the journal, tears burning her eyes. This man had died thinking of her, hoping for her happiness even as flames consumed him. A sound outside made her look up. Through the window, she saw riders approaching, too many to be friendly at this hour. She grabbed the rifle, checked it was loaded, and stepped onto the porch. But it wasn't Sinclair's men. It was Marshal Brennan with a federal posse. Miss Whitmore, the marshal said, touching his hat. Sorry for the late hour, but I have news you need to hear. We've arrested Dixon for the barn burning. Clara nearly dropped the rifle. How? Man got drunk in Billings, bragged about it. One of my deputies was listening. The marshal's expression was grim. He's agreed to testify that Sinclair ordered it. The world seemed to shift. Evidence. Real, legal evidence. What happens now? Now we arrest Sinclair. Tonight before he can run or buy his way out. The marshal paused. Thought you might want to be there. See justice done. Clara didn't hesitate. Give me a moment to dress properly. She put on her best dress, the dark blue one she'd worn on the train, now cleaned and pressed. If she was going to watch Sinclair fall, she'd do it with dignity. The ride to town was surreal, the federal posse surrounding her like an honor guard. Word had already spread somehow, and Main Street was lined with people despite the late hour. The Silver Star had emptied out,
its patrons and workers standing witness. Sinclair's house was the finest in town, 3 stories of ostentation. The marshal didn't bother knocking. They found Sinclair in his study burning papers. His face went white when he saw the marshal, then red when he saw Clara. "You!" he snarled. "This is your doing." "No," Clara said quietly. "This is yours. You burned my barn. You poisoned my cattle. You thought power meant you could take whatever you wanted. I made this town. Without me, without you, this town might actually breathe," Judge Patterson said, entering behind them. "Robert Sinclair, you're under arrest for arson, destruction of property, and conspiracy to defraud, federal charges." As the marshals dragged Sinclair away, his son appeared on the stairs, looking young and frightened without his father's shadow to hide in. "Miss Whitmore," Robert said, his voice small, "what happens to us now?" Clara studied him, this boy who'd called her a cripple, who'd hurt Belle, who'd embodied every cruel thing she'd faced. But he was also barely 20, shaped by his father's poison. "That depends on you," she said. "Your father's going to prison. The bank will need new leadership. You can be like him, or you can be better. Choose." She left him there to make that choice, walking out into the night where half the town waited. Gideon stood at the front, his expression proud. "It's over," Morrison said, appearing at her elbow. "No," Clara said, looking at the faces around her, her community, her people. "It's just beginning." The weeks following Sinclair's arrest passed in a blur of unexpected changes. Without his iron grip on the territory's economy, new possibilities emerged like spring flowers through snow. Clara found herself at the center of it all, though she hadn't sought the position. "You've become something of a folk hero," Judge Patterson told her one morning at the courthouse, where she'd come to file paperwork for the ranch. "The woman who brought down Sinclair." "I didn't bring him down. He did that himself." "Perhaps, but you stood when everyone else knelt. That matters." It mattered more than Clara had anticipated. Every day brought new visitors to the ranch, small farmers seeking advice, women trapped in bad situations looking for work, cowboys who'd been blacklisted by Sinclair now seeking employment. Her kitchen table became an informal court where disputes were settled and alliances formed. "You're running yourself ragged," Mrs. Morrison observed, finding Clara asleep over her ledgers one afternoon. "Can't save everyone, child." "I'm not trying to save anyone. I'm just trying to build something sustainable." But sustainability required more than good intentions. The ranch needed significant investment to truly thrive: better breeding stock, improved fencing, expanded water access. The Silver Star contract helped, but it wasn't enough. That evening, Clara sat in Gideon's office, going over both sets of books. The saloon was thriving, especially now that people didn't fear Sinclair's retribution for patronizing it. But Clara noticed something odd in the patterns. "You're losing money on purpose," she said, looking up from the ledgers. Gideon didn't deny it. "Some of the girls need more help than others. I adjust their percentages accordingly. That's generous but unsustainable. Story of my life." He leaned back in his chair, studying her. "You have that look, the one that means you're about to propose something outrageous. What if we combined operations? Formally, I mean. The ranch provides beef and produce. The Silver Star provides steady income and distribution. We share profits, split investments. A merger. A partnership. Equal stakes, equal say." Gideon was quiet for a long moment. People would talk, more than they already do. Let them. We're already social pariahs, might as well be profitable ones. Is that what we are? Social pariahs? Clara met his eyes, seeing the question beneath the question. They'd been dancing around this for weeks. The growing tension, the careful distance, the moments when their hands almost touched over ledgers and contracts. "I don't know what we are," she said honestly, "but I know we work well together." Before Gideon could respond, Rose burst through the door. "We've got trouble." Robert Sinclair's downstairs with a bunch of men. They're drunk and angry. They descended to find chaos brewing. Robert stood on a table, swaying slightly, addressing a crowd of former Sinclair employees. "My father built this town," he shouted.
And this crippled witch destroyed him. Are we going to stand for that? The room was divided, some men nodding agreement, others looking uncomfortable. Clara noticed several of her new allies present, including Tom Brennan, who was slowly moving toward Robert's table. "That's enough, Junior," Gideon said, his voice cutting through the noise. Robert wheeled toward them, his eyes wild. "You! You helped her. Traitor to your own kind." "My kind?" Gideon laughed. "Boy, you don't know anything about my kind. I know you chose a limping Eastern nobody over the man who made this town possible." The slur hung in the air like gun smoke. Clara felt the familiar sting, but before she could respond, something unexpected happened. Belle stood up from where she'd been serving drinks. "That limping Eastern nobody paid my doctor bills when your father wouldn't give me time off for being sick," she said clearly. "She hired my brother when nobody else would on account of his drinking," another voice added, one of the cowboys from the back. "Gave my family credit at fair terms," Henderson, the store owner, said from near the door. One by one, voices rose from around the room, telling small stories of Clara's quiet interventions over the past months. She hadn't realized how many lives she'd touched, how many small kindnesses had accumulated into something larger. Robert's face went from red to purple. "She's still a cripple. Still doesn't belong here." "Neither did your grandfather when he arrived," Mrs. Hartley said, entering the saloon with perfect timing. "Difference is, she's earned her place through merit, not theft." "What's that supposed to mean?" "Ask your father how he really got his start. Ask him about the Indian land he stole, the miners he cheated, the widows he foreclosed on." Mrs. Hartley's voice was steel wrapped in silk. "Clara Whitmore has more honor in her twisted foot than your entire family has in its whole body." Robert lunged at her, but Tom Brennan caught him easily, wrestling him to the ground. The young man struggled briefly, then began to sob, ugly, wrenching sounds that made everyone uncomfortable. "Get him out of here," Gideon said quietly. "Take him home. Make sure he sleeps it off." As Tom and another man hauled Robert away, Clara found herself at the center of a circle of attention she hadn't sought. "I'm not a hero," she said to the room at large. "I'm just someone trying to make a life here. Same as all of you." "Maybe that's what heroes are," Rose said. "Ordinary people who refuse to be pushed down." The crowd dispersed slowly, leaving Clara, Gideon, and Mrs. Hartley alone in the saloon. "That was well timed," Clara told the older woman. "I've been watching that boy spiral for weeks. Figured tonight would be the night he exploded." Mrs. Hartley accepted a whiskey from Gideon. "His father's trial starts next week. It's going to get worse before it gets better." She was right. The trial brought newspaper reporters from as far as Chicago, all eager for the story of the mail-order bride who'd toppled a frontier empire. Clara hated the attention, especially when they focused on her disability as some kind of poetic justice. "Makes a better story," one reporter explained, cornering her outside the courthouse. "Beautiful symbolism, the damaged woman defeating the perfect man." "There's nothing beautiful about it," Clara said sharply. "And Sinclair was never perfect. He was just powerful. Same thing in most people's eyes." "Then most people need better eyes." The trial itself was anticlimactic. With Dixon's testimony and the physical evidence, conviction was certain. Sinclair was sentenced to 5 years in federal prison. Not enough, in Clara's opinion, but more than anyone had expected. As Sinclair was led away in chains, he stopped near Clara. "This isn't over. I have friends, influence. You'll never be safe." "I was never safe," Clara replied. "Difference is, now neither are you." With Sinclair gone, the power vacuum in Clearwater created opportunities and chaos in equal measure. The bank needed new leadership, and to everyone's surprise, Robert stepped forward, not as his father's son, but as something different. "I want to make amends," he told Clara, appearing at the ranch on a cold November morning. "I know I can't undo what I said, what I did, but I want to try to be better." Clara studied him, thin, hollow-eyed, but seemingly sincere. "Why should I believe you?" "Because I have nothing left to lose. Father's gone, his friends won't acknowledge me, and I've realized I never liked the man he was making me become." He paused. "You asked me to choose. I'm choosing. What do you want from me?" "Nothing. I just wanted you to know that the bank will be fair now. Any loans you need, any support for the ranch, it'll be based on merit, not personality." It was a start, though Clara remained wary. Trust, once broken, was hard to rebuild. Winter arrived in earnest, bringing challenges that had nothing to do with human enemies. The first blizzard trapped Clara at the ranch for 3 days, snow drifting higher than the windows. She'd prepared well, plenty of food, fuel, and feed for the animals, but the isolation was harder than expected. On the third night, as the storm finally began to break, she heard someone struggling through the snow. She grabbed the rifle, then recognized Gideon's voice cursing creatively at the drifts. She opened the door to find him half frozen, ice in his beard and his coat stiff with snow. "What are you doing here?" she demanded, pulling him inside. "Wanted to make sure you were all right." Storm was worse than expected. "You could have died coming out here." "But I didn't." He was shivering violently. Clara helped him out of his frozen coat, wrapping him in blankets and pushing him toward the fire. "You're an idiot," she said, making coffee with hands that shook slightly. "Probably. But I kept thinking about you out here alone. Maybe running low on supplies or firewood. I'm perfectly capable of taking care of myself." "I know, that's not why I came." Clara stopped stirring the coffee. "Why did you come?" Gideon was quiet for a moment, staring into the fire. "Because I've spent months pretending I don't care more than I should. Because every time you walk into the Silver Star, the whole place feels different. Because when I heard Sinclair threaten you, I wanted to kill him with my bare hands." The confession hung between them, raw and honest. Clara set down the coffee pot, moving to sit beside him on the floor near the fire. "I don't know how to do this," she said quietly. "I came here to marry a stranger for practical reasons. Everything since has been about survival. Maybe it's time to think about more than survival." "Is it? I have a ranch to run, debts to pay, a reputation to maintain or destroy, depending on the day." "All true. But Clara, you're allowed to want things for yourself, too." She thought about the wanting, how it had crept up on her, quiet as snow. The way she looked for him in crowds, the way his opinion mattered more than others, the way she felt both safer and more dangerous when he was near. "What if it ruins everything?" she asked. "The partnership, the friendship, the balance we found? What if it doesn't?" He reached out, touching her face gently. Clara leaned into the touch, surprising herself with the hunger for contact. How long since someone had touched her with tenderness rather than pity or professional distance? The kiss was inevitable, soft at first, then deeper as months of restraint dissolved. Clara had been kissed before. Chaste pecks from Boston suitors who'd quickly moved on to easier prospects. But never like this. Never with such intention, such careful passion. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Gideon smiled. "Well, that's going to make the ledger meetings more interesting." Clara laughed, surprising herself. "You're impossible. But you like me anyway." "God help me, I do." They spent the night talking by the fire, sharing stories they'd held back. Gideon told her about the war, the battles that still visited him in nightmares, the friends lost, the reasons he'd run west seeking peace. Clara told him about her parents' death, the slow slide into poverty, the 100 small humiliations that had driven her to answer a stranger's advertisement. "We're both running from something," she observed as dawn approached. "Maybe. Or maybe we're running towards something. Just took a while to find it." The storm had passed, leaving the world crystalline and new. They stood on the porch, watching the sunrise paint the snow-covered land gold and pink. "What happens now?" Clara asked. "Now we figure it out as we go." "Same as we've been doing. People will talk more than ever. Let them. We've already scandalized the entire territory. Might as well give them something new to discuss." But the talk, when it came, was surprisingly mild. Perhaps because the town had bigger concerns, rebuilding after Sinclair's fall, preparing for a harsh winter, adapting to new power structures. Or perhaps because Clara and Gideon had earned enough respect that their choices were seen as their own business. "About time," Rose said when she noticed the change between them. "We've been taking bets for months." "Who won?" "Mrs. Morrison. She said it would take a blizzard to force you two to admit the obvious." The winter was hard, but not impossible. They lost some cattle to cold and wolves, but fewer than expected. The partnership between ranch and saloon proved profitable, with Clara's business sense and Gideon's connections creating opportunities neither could have managed alone. Mrs. Hartley made good on her promise, filing papers that made Clara her legal heir. "Might as well make it official," she said, "though I plan to stick around for years yet, just to annoy everyone." Spring arrived with its usual mixture of mud and promise. Clara stood in her garden, planting the seeds she'd ordered from Denver, vegetables, but also flowers, because beauty mattered too. Her leg ached from the work, but it was a good ache, earned and honest. "Letter for you," Morrison called, riding up with the mail from town. Clara opened it, expecting business correspondence. Instead, she found elegant handwriting she didn't recognize. "Dear Miss Whitmore, you don't know me, but I knew Nathaniel Harrington. We served together in the cavalry years before he met Martha. I've heard about what you've done with his ranch, how you've honored his memory while building your own legacy. I thought you should know that he wrote to me about you in those last weeks. He said he'd found someone who understood that strength wasn't about what worked perfectly, but about what worked despite imperfection. He would be proud of what you've accomplished. Sincerely, Captain James Walker." Clara read the letter twice, then tucked it into her pocket. Another ghost. Another reminder of the man whose death had given her life. That evening, there was a celebration at the Silver Star. Tom Brennan was getting married, and the whole town seemed determined to dance. Clara watched from the bar, her leg too sore for dancing, but content to observe the joy. "Regret not being out there?" Gideon asked, joining her. "No, I've never been much of a dancer." Neither was Nathaniel, according to Morrison. Martha used to complain about his 2 left feet. They watched Rose teaching Robert Sinclair to waltz. The young man had become a regular, trying to rebuild his reputation one apology at a time. It was strange seeing him here, in the place where he'd caused such trouble, but redemption had to start somewhere. "I've been thinking," Clara said. "Dangerous habit. About the future. The ranch is stable, the saloon's thriving. We could expand, maybe buy some of the failed Sinclair properties. Build an empire of our own? Build something sustainable, something that lasts beyond us." Gideon was quiet for a moment. "Us. I like the sound of that. Even if it's complicated? Especially then. Simple is boring." Judge Patterson approached, looking pleased. "Miss Whitmore, Mr. Hale, I have news. The territorial governor has appointed me to oversee redistribution of Sinclair's seized assets. I wanted to give you first opportunity to bid." "On what?" Clara asked. "The Sinclair Ranch, all 4,000 acres. Clara's breath caught. The Sinclair Ranch was the largest in the territory, with prime grazing land and water rights that would secure any operation for generations. "We couldn't afford it," she said. "Actually," Mrs. Hartley said, appearing with her usual perfect timing, "we could, if we pooled resources. The Double H, your ranch, Mr. Hale's capital, and I know several others who'd invest in a cooperative venture." "A cooperative?" Gideon raised an eyebrow. "Why not?" Sinclair ruled through division and fear. Why not try cooperation and mutual benefit? It was audacious, even by Clara's standards. But as she looked around the room, at the people who'd rallied to her, who'd rebuilt her barn, who'd stood against Sinclair, she could see it working. "We'd need strict contracts," she said. "Clear terms, fair distribution." "You'd manage it," Mrs. Hartley said. It wasn't a question. "Why me?" "Because you're the only person everyone trusts. The Eastern education, the Western experience. You're a bridge." Clara looked at Gideon, who nodded slightly. "All right, let's try." The news spread through the saloon like wildfire. Within an hour, Clara had a dozen potential investors, all eager to be part of something larger than themselves. "You realize what you're doing?" Morrison asked quietly. "You're not just buying land, you're reshaping the whole territory. Someone has to. Might as well be someone who understands what it's like to be powerless." As the evening wound down, Clara found herself on the Silver Star's small stage, pushed there by Rose and the others. The room fell quiet, expectant. "I came here to marry a stranger," Clara began, her voice carrying clearly. "I found instead a community. You took in a limping mail-order bride with no prospects and gave her a chance. Now I'm asking you to take another chance, not on me, but on each other, on the idea that we can build something better than what came before. The applause was immediate and sustained. Clara stood there, feeling the weight of their expectations and trust. It should have been terrifying. Instead, it felt like coming home. Later, as the crowd dispersed, she and Gideon walked toward the ranch. The moon was full, turning the landscape silver in shadow. "You know what you've committed to?" he asked. "A lifetime of ledgers and arguments and small-town politics?" "And me," he said quietly. "If you'll have me." Clara stopped walking. "Are you proposing?" "I'm stating intentions. The proposal can come later, when you're ready." "What makes you think I'm not ready now?" He smiled. "Because you're Clara Whitmore. You don't do anything until you've analyzed it from every angle and decided it's the logical choice." "Logic has nothing to do with this." "No? Then what does?" Clara considered the question. What did drive her feelings for this complicated man who'd given her a chance when no one else would? "Faith," she said finally. "The same faith that brought me here in the first place. The belief that sometimes the best things come from the most unexpected places." They reached the ranch as dawn was breaking. Clara stood on the porch Nathaniel had built, looking out at the land she'd inherited, the life she'd constructed from loss and determination. "He would have been proud," Gideon said, knowing her thoughts. "Maybe. But this isn't his story anymore. It's mine." "Ours," Gideon corrected. "Ours," Clara agreed. Inside the house, she lit the lamp and opened the ledger to a fresh page. There was so much to plan: the cooperative, the expansion, the future they were building together. But first she wrote a single line at the top of the page: "New beginnings, properly calculated." The work would be hard. There would be setbacks, conflicts, moments of doubt. But Clara had learned that the twisted path often led to the most interesting destinations. Through the window, she could see riders approaching. Morrison with the morning crew, ready for another day's work. Behind them, the sun climbed higher, painting the Montana sky in shades of gold and possibility. She'd come west as a mail-order bride, desperate and alone. She'd stayed as something else entirely: a rancher, a businesswoman, a partner, a leader. The limp that had defined her limitations in Boston had become just another part of her story here, neither more nor less important than her sharp mind or steady heart. "Ready for another day?" Gideon asked, pouring coffee. "Always," Clara said, and meant it. The story that had begun with abandonment at a train station had become something neither she nor Nathaniel could have imagined. It wasn't the life she'd planned, but it was the life she'd earned, one calculated risk at a time. And as the morning light filled the kitchen where a dead man had once imagined sharing breakfast with his mail-order bride, Clara Whitmore, rancher, survivor, an architect of her own destiny, picked up her pen and began planning an empire built on cooperation rather than conquest. The ledgers would balance. They always did, eventually. But the real profit, Clara had learned, wasn't measured in numbers alone. It was measured in community, in second chances, in the courage to rebuild after the burning. And in that accounting, she was wealthy beyond measure. The cooperative's first meeting took place in Clara's barn on a morning when spring rain drummed against the new roof. 23 people had gathered, representing various interests across the territory. Some sat on hay bales, others stood against the walls, all watching Clara with expressions ranging from hope to skepticism. "The Sinclair Ranch is up for auction in 3 weeks, Clara began, standing despite her leg's protest. "If we pool our resources, we can purchase it collectively and divide it based on investment and need." "Who decides what's fair?" asked Samuel Green, a small rancher who'd lost half his land to Sinclair's manipulations. "We all do. Every investor gets a vote proportional to their investment, but no single person can hold more than 20% of votes, regardless of contribution." "That's socialist talk," someone muttered from the back. "That's practical talk," Mrs. Hartley countered sharply. "We've seen what happens when one man holds all the power." "This is about balance." The discussion continued for hours, sometimes heated, always passionate. Clara moderated with the same precision she brought to ledgers, noting concerns, finding compromises. Gideon watched from his position by the door, occasionally intervening when tempers flared. By noon, they had an agreement in principle. The cooperative would bid collectively, with Clara managing the finances and an elected board making operational decisions. It wasn't perfect, but it was a beginning. As people departed, Morrison lingered. You know there'll be resistance. Not everyone wants to see this succeed. Sinclair still has friends? More like people who benefited from the old system. Change threatens them. Clara understood. She'd threatened simply by existing, a disabled Eastern woman succeeding where strong Western men had failed. Now she was threatening the entire power structure. That evening, she was working late in the Silver Star's office when unexpected visitors arrived. 3 men she didn't recognize, well-dressed in the way that suggested city origins. Miss Whitmore, I'm James Hutchinson from the Continental Railroad Company. Clara set down her pen carefully. The Continental Railroad was expanding west, and their arrival in any territory changed everything. How can I help you, Mr. Hutchinson? It's how we can help each other. We're planning a line through this region. We need reliable beef suppliers for our workers and eventually our passengers. We've heard about your cooperative venture. Word travels fast. Money travels faster. We're prepared to offer an exclusive contract if your cooperative can guarantee consistent supply. Claire's mind raced through calculations. A railroad contract would secure the cooperative's future, but it would also mean rapid expansion, more complexity, more risk. What kind of numbers are we discussing? Hutchinson named figures that made Claire's breath catch. It was more than the entire territory currently produced. We'd need to triple our operations, she said. Can you? With the Sinclair Ranch and proper investment, possibly. But we'd need infrastructure, processing facilities, transportation networks, trained workers. We can help with that. The Continental believes in investing in its suppliers. After they left, Clara sat alone in the lamplight, staring at Hutchinson's business card. This was beyond anything she'd imagined when she'd stepped off that train platform. Big thoughts? Gideon asked, entering with 2 glasses of whiskey. Enormous thoughts, terrifying thoughts. She explained Hutchinson's offer. Gideon whistled low. That would change everything, not just for us, but for the entire territory. I know. The question is whether we're ready for that level of change. Are we ever ready? Seems to me we just jump and build wings on the way down. Clara smiled despite her anxiety. Is that what we're doing? Building wings? Either that or learning to enjoy the fall. The next morning brought disturbing news. Someone had poisoned the well at the Hartley Ranch, forcing her to destroy contaminated water supplies. Then Tom Brennan's fence was cut, allowing cattle to scatter across hostile territory. Someone's trying to sabotage the cooperative before it starts, Tom said, anger burning in his eyes. Clara gathered the key members at the Silver Star. They're trying to scare us apart. Instead, we need to come together stronger. Easy to say, Samuel Green argued. You've got Morrison and his men protecting your place. Some of us are alone. Then we change that. We create patrol routes, shared protection. We look after each other. Like a militia, someone asked nervously. Like neighbors, Clara corrected. Like family. It took 3 days to organize, but soon they had riders checking on every cooperative member regularly. The attacks decreased, though the tension remained. The auction day arrived with theatrical weather, dark clouds and distant thunder that seemed to echo everyone's mood. The courthouse was packed, with interested parties from 3 territories present. Clara had spent the previous night reviewing their finances one final time. They had enough, barely, if nothing unexpected happened. But unexpected was the frontier's specialty. Judge Patterson presided, his expression carefully neutral. The bidding started low, with several small ranchers making token efforts. Then the real competition began. A cattle syndicate from Chicago bid aggressively, driving the price up quickly. Clara countered each raise, aware of their limit approaching. Beside her, Mrs. Hartley gripped her cane tightly, while Gideon watched the Chicago representatives with suspicion. Something's off, he murmured. They're too confident. Clara noticed it too. The syndicate's leader kept glancing at his pocket watch, as if waiting for something. At the crucial moment when Clara made what would likely be their final bid, the courthouse door burst open. Robert Sinclair entered, and Clara's heart sank. Had he betrayed them after all? But Robert walked past the syndicate representatives to stand beside Clara. I'm investing in the cooperative, he announced to the room. $100,000. The silence was deafening. It was more money than most present would see in a lifetime. Judge Patterson found his voice first. "Mr. Sinclair, do you have proof of funds?" Robert produced bank documents. "My personal inheritance from my mother's family. It was never tied to my father's crimes." "Why?" Clara asked quietly. "Because I want to be part of building something instead of tearing it down. Because I need to prove, to myself more than anyone, that I'm not him." With Robert's investment, the cooperative easily won the auction. As papers were signed and ownership transferred, Clara felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders like a yoke. Outside, Hutchinson was waiting. "Impressive display, Miss Whitmore. The Continental is even more interested now. We'll need time to organize." "You have 6 months. We'll send engineers to help plan the infrastructure." As the crowd dispersed, Clara found herself standing with Gideon and Robert in the street. The younger man looked uncertain now that his grand gesture was complete. "They won't accept me easily," he said. "No," Clara agreed, "but then they didn't accept me either at first." "Acceptance is earned slowly, through consistent action." "I can do that, I hope." That evening, the Silver Star hosted an impromptu celebration. The cooperative members gathered to toast their success and plan their future. Clara watched from the bar, seeing the tentative hope in weathered faces. "You did it," Rose said, joining her. "You actually did it. We did it, all of us. But you let it." The limping mail-order bride who wouldn't give up. Clara touched her leg absently. The limp was still there, would always be there. But somewhere along the way, it had stopped defining her limits. "Dance with me," Gideon said suddenly, appearing at her elbow. "You know I can't dance properly." Neither could Nathaniel, remember? But he was planning to try, for you. The mention of Nathaniel, rare now, made Clara's throat tight. That was different. Was it? He saw you as someone worth attempting the impossible for. So do I. The music was slow, a waltz that Belle was playing on the slightly out-of-tune piano. Gideon led Clara to a clear spot, ignoring the turned heads and whispers. Clara had danced before, badly, at Boston social events where politeness demanded participation. But this was different. Gideon adjusted his steps to accommodate her limitation, supporting her when her leg wavered, making her disability part of the dance rather than an impediment to it. "You've practiced this," she accused. "Morrison's been teaching me." Man knows more than cattle and complaints. They moved together, imperfectly, but honestly. Others began joining them on the floor, and soon the Silver Star was full of dancing bodies, celebrating not just the land they'd acquired, but the community they'd built. Later, as Clara sat catching her breath, Mrs. Hartley approached. "I have something for you," the older woman said, producing a small velvet box. This was my mother's, and her mother's before that. Inside was a simple gold ring with a small sapphire. "I can't accept this," Clara protested. "You can, and you will." "It's not about marriage, though heaven knows that Hale Boy is working up to proposing. It's about continuity, about women who survive and thrive despite everything, Mrs." Hartley closed Clara's fingers around the box. "My family line ends with me, but what we've built here, that continues through you." Clara felt tears threaten. "I don't know if I'm strong enough for all these expectations." Strength isn't about being enough. It's about continuing despite not being enough. The next months passed in a blur of construction and coordination. The Sinclair Ranch was divided and developed. The railroad sent engineers who helped design loading facilities and transportation routes. The cooperative grew from 23 members to 60. Clara split her time between the ranch, the Silver Star, and endless meetings. Her relationship with Gideon evolved naturally, without formal declaration. He was simply there, a steady presence when everything else whirled in chaos. One evening, as summer gave way to autumn, Clara stood on the hill overlooking what had been the Sinclair Empire. Cattle dotted the landscape, but so did new buildings, new fences, new hopes. The railroad track was visible in the distance, steel promise of connection to the wider world. "Regrets?" Morrison asked, joining her. "About what?" "Not living the quiet life Nathaniel planned for you." Clara considered it. That life, peaceful, traditional, limited,
Seemed like something from a dream now. He didn't really know me, she said finally. He saw potential, but not specifics. I think he would have been surprised. Pleasantly. I hope so. A rider approached at speed, one of the cooperative scouts. Miss Clara! Train robbery, about 10 miles east. They hit the payroll car. Clara's blood chilled. The cooperative's payment from the railroad was on that train. How bad? 3 guards dead, they got everything. Without that payment, they couldn't meet their obligations. The cooperative would collapse before it truly began. Clara rode hard to the scene, Gideon and several others with her. The train sat disabled on the tracks, its guards being loaded into a cargo car. Marshal Brennan was already there, examining evidence. Professional job, he said grimly. Knew exactly which car, exactly when to hit. Inside information, Clara concluded. Has to be. Clara's mind raced through possibilities. Who knew about the payment schedule? Too many people. But who would benefit most from the cooperative's failure? We need that money back, she told the marshal. Without it, everything collapses. I'll do what I can, but these men are probably long gone. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. She walked through the Silver Star, now closed and quiet. In Gideon's office, she spread out all the cooperative's paperwork, looking for patterns, anomalies, anything. At dawn, she found it. A series of small discrepancies in timber orders signed by someone whose handwriting she recognized. Dixon, she breathed. Sinclair's former enforcer, supposedly in prison. But what if he wasn't? What if he'd made a deal, traded information for early release? Clara rode to the marshal's office with her suspicions. Brennan listened, then sent telegrams to various contacts. By noon, he had confirmation. Dixon had been released 2 weeks prior, supposedly for good behavior. He knows our territory, our patterns, Clara said. He'd know where to hide. The old Sinclair silver mine, Morrison suggested. He'd joined them, along with Gideon and Tom. It's been abandoned for years, but the shafts are still intact. They formed a posse, official and unofficial members combined. Clara insisted on joining, despite protests. This is my fight, she said firmly. Our fight. The ride to the mine was tense. Clara's leg ached from the hard riding, but she pushed through. As they approached the abandoned buildings, she saw signs of recent activity, horse tracks, disturbed dust. They're here, Brennan confirmed. The confrontation was brief but violent. Dixon and 5 associates had indeed taken shelter in the mine. When cornered, they fought viciously. Clara, positioned with a rifle on high ground, watched Gideon wade into the fight with a fury that reminded her he'd been a soldier long before a saloon keeper. When the dust settled, 2 outlaws were dead, the rest captured. They found the stolen money in the mine shaft wrapped in canvas. Why? Clara asked Dixon as he was led away in chains. Sinclair's finished. Why continue his fight? Dixon spat blood. Because people like you don't belong here. This territory was built by strong men, not broken women. Funny, Clara said. Seems the broken woman is the one still standing. The recovered money saved the cooperative, but the incident served as a reminder. Not everyone welcomed change. Security measures were increased, communication protocols tightened. As winter approached again, Clara stood in her office at the ranch, now expanded with a proper addition. The book showed profit, real, substantial profit. The cooperative was working. Marry me, Gideon said from the doorway. Clara turned, stylus still in hand. That's not a question. Doesn't need to be. We've been dancing around it for months, years really, if you count from when you first walked into the Silver Star. I was grieving a man I'd never met then. And now? Clara set down her stylus. Through the window, she could see the ranch Nathaniel had built, now transformed into something larger. She thought about his letters, his dreams, his death that had brought her here. Now I'm living a life he never could have imagined for me. Is that a yes? That's a let me finish this ledger first. Gideon laughed. Of course it is. I'd expect nothing less. But Clara wasn't really focused on the numbers anymore. She was thinking about the journey. From that train platform to this moment, every step, even with her limp, had brought her here. Yes, she said suddenly. Yes, I'll marry you.
even though I can't spell your name right half the time. The echo of Nathaniel's letters made her smile, especially then. Means you'll fit right in with the frontier tradition. They married in spring when the prairie bloomed with wildflowers. The ceremony took place at the ranch, with the entire cooperative attending. Judge Patterson officiated, Mrs. Hartley stood as witness, and Rose sang something beautiful and slightly scandalous. Robert Sinclair attended, still working to earn his place in the new order. He'd prove valuable to the cooperative, his banking knowledge helping secure additional contracts. "Thank you for taking a chance on me," he told Clara at the reception. "Everyone deserves a second chance, sometimes even a third." As the sun set over the celebration, Clara stood apart for a moment, looking east toward the hill where Nathaniel was buried beside Martha. She'd visited once, leaving flowers and a letter thanking him for the inadvertent gift of his death. "You all right?" Gideon asked, joining her. "Just thinking about circles, how his ending became my beginning." "And now?" "Now we write our own story." The railroad arrived in full force that summer, bringing prosperity and problems in equal measure. The town tripled in size seemingly overnight. The Silver Star expanded, adding a restaurant and hotel. The cooperative struggled to meet demand while maintaining quality. Clara managed it all with her ledgers and careful calculations, but also with something more, the hard-won wisdom of someone who'd been broken and rebuilt herself. One evening, as she worked late in the cooperative's new office building, a young woman appeared at her door. She was thin, travel-worn, with a familiar desperation in her eyes. "Miss Whitmore, Mrs. Hale, I mean, I've come from Philadelphia. I heard about what you've built here, how you've succeeded despite—" She gestured vaguely at Clara's leg. "Despite my disability?" "Despite everything, I have a clubfoot. My family wants to send me to an asylum, says I'm unmarriageable, a burden." The girl, she couldn't be more than 20, straightened her shoulders. "I want to work. I'm educated, good with numbers. I thought maybe." Clara saw herself 5 years ago, desperate and determined in equal measure. "Can you start Monday?" she asked. The girl's face transformed with hope. "Really? Really? We'll start you in the cooperative office. Fair warning, it's hard work, and some people will be difficult about your foot." "I can handle difficult." "I believe you can." As the girl left, barely containing her joy, Morrison appeared. "Taking in strays again?" "Taking in fighters." "There's a difference." "Nathaniel would be proud, you know. This is bigger than anything he dreamed." "Maybe. But I think he'd be proudest that his death gave someone else life." That winter, Clara gave birth to a daughter. They named her Faith, for the leap Clara had taken boarding that train, for Nathaniel's faith in a stranger's letters, for the community's faith in an impossible cooperative. As Clara held her daughter, she thought about the future, what world they were building for this child born of frontier dreams and Eastern determination. "She'll never know the limitations we did," Gideon said, watching them both with soft eyes. "She'll have her own. Everyone does. But hopefully she'll also know that limitations can be overcome, worked around, transformed into strengths." The Silver Star had closed for the evening in honor of the birth, but Clara could hear celebration in the streets. The cooperative had become more than a business venture. It was the heart of a new kind of frontier town, one built on cooperation rather than conquest. Mrs. Hartley visited, bringing the family Bible she'd mentioned months ago. "Write her name in it," she instructed. "Start the record of your new family line." As Clara wrote Faith Clara Hale in careful script, she thought about all the names that had led to this moment. Nathaniel Harrington, who'd died reaching for impossible dreams. Martha, who'd built alongside him. Mrs. Hartley, who'd chosen legacy over blood. Even Sinclair, whose cruelty had forged the coalition that defeated him. "What are you thinking?" Gideon asked. "That every ending is also a beginning. That sometimes the life we plan isn't nearly as interesting as the life that happens. And which life is this?" Clara looked at her daughter, at her husband, at the window that showed the town they'd helped rebuild. This is the life that happens when a limping mail-order bride refuses to accept abandonment as an ending. Years passed. The cooperative grew into one of the most successful in the Western Territories. The Silver Star became a legitimate theater and restaurant, though it never lost its frontier character. Clara's daughter grew up strong and unashamed, running despite her mother's limp, dreaming beyond any limitations. One day, sorting through old papers, Clara found Nathaniel's letters again. She read them with different eyes now, seeing not just the loneliness, but the hope, not just the plans, but the possibilities. The final letter, the one he'd never sent, was at the bottom. Clara, by the time you read this, you'll be here, starting our life together. I want you to know that whatever happens, taking a chance on you through those letters was the bravest thing I've ever done. I hope I'm brave enough to be the husband you deserve. But if something happens to me, if this dream doesn't turn out as planned, promise me you'll keep dreaming. The frontier needs dreamers, especially ones who dream despite everything. Yours in hope, Nathaniel. Clara tucked the letter away carefully. She'd kept the promise without ever knowing it had been made. That evening, there was a celebration at the Silver Star, the cooperative's 10th anniversary. Clara stood before the crowd, her leg aching as it always did, but her spirit undaunted. 10 years ago, I stood on a train platform, abandoned and alone. Today I stand here with all of you, part of something that man who left me there could never have imagined. We built this not despite our limitations, but because of them. We knew what it was to be powerless, so we created power through unity. The applause was thunderous. Later, as the party continued, Clara walked outside with Gideon and Faith. The town sprawled before them, electric lights beginning to replace gas lamps, automobiles starting to appear alongside horses. It's changing so fast, Faith observed. Everything changes, Clara told her daughter. The trick is making sure you're part of guiding the change rather than being swept along by it. Is that what you did? Clara thought about it. The journey from Boston to here, from abandonment to authority, from isolation to community. No, she said finally. I was definitely swept along at first. But somewhere in the sweeping, I learned to swim, then to navigate, then to chart courses for others. Will you teach me? Every day. As they walked back to the Silver Star, Clara's limp as pronounced as ever, she felt Nathaniel's presence one last time, not as a ghost or regret, but as a gratitude. His death had given her life. His dreams had launched her reality. The mail-order bride with a limp had become the architect of an empire built on cooperation and courage. The abandoned woman at the station had become the center of a community that refused to abandon anyone. And somewhere in Montana soil, beneath a simple headstone, Nathaniel Harrington rested beside his Martha, their sacrifices having bloomed into something neither could have imagined but both would have loved. The story that began with ending had become a testament to the power of refusing to accept endings as final. Clara Whitmore Hale stood as proof that grace could be found not in perfection, but in the courage to continue despite imperfection. The stars wheeled overhead, constant despite all the change below. And in the Silver Star, music played on, imperfect, beautiful, and absolutely defiantly alive.